for your testimony and for being with us today. You have been consistent in your testimony to this committee that EPA has not had the adequate resources needed to fully implement the Lautenberg Act, and I think most of us would agree with that. Funding for the program can come from two different sources, as we know: user fees generated by EPA and annual appropriations provided by us. In FY 2023, EPA received some additional resources from Congress, as you know, though still well short of the President's request. The EPA is also working to improve its ability to collect user fees. Would you give us a sense of what the EPA was able to do with the increased funding in FY 2023? I know you've touched on this to some extent, but I think it could deserve some additional attention. And what more would the EPA be able to do if the agency received additional funding through both annual appropriations and more effective user fee collection?
Well, thanks very much for that question, Senator Carper. And we have really prioritized hiring with that additional pay increase or funding increase, and have especially focused our efforts on the new chemicals division, because we really do agree that that was the area that was most under-resourced as a result of the new law, which basically changed our, what our past practice had been, which was reviewing 20% of new chemicals before they go into commerce, to doing 100% of new chemicals before they go into commerce. So 5 times the amount of work, and for 6 years, $0 extra dollars with which to do it. So in addition to sort of prioritizing hiring and getting people in the door and trained as quickly as possible, we've also really tried to standardize our approaches for chemistries that we know industry comes in with a lot of applications for. So, for example, we've been working to create a standardized and streamlined review process for the chemicals that are needed by the battery sector. We've got a years-long collaboration with the semiconductor sector, and that has resulted in a regulatory path forward for dozens of the photoacid generators that they need to do their work. And I personally met with them a couple weeks ago, and we talked about expanding that collaboration in the future. So we've really tried to work smarter, not harder, which is something Senator Markey often says, and are going to continue to do so with the funding that we have. If we got more, we'd be able to modernize those standard operating procedures more quickly. We'd be able to modernize our science policies more quickly. We'd be able to create efficient approaches for classes of chemistries more quickly. And of course, we'd also be able to write rules more quickly and do risk evaluations more quickly, which would move through the tens of thousands of chemicals that were left unreviewed under the old law more quickly as well.
All right, thank you. Before I turn to Senator Capito for her questions, I have one more I want to ask. In 2018, the previous administration, you'll recall, promulgated a user fee rule that was based on faulty data, which has limited the EPA's ability to collect user fees as intended by those of us who worked to pass the Lautenberg Act. The Biden administration has been working to update this data and revise the rule. Here's my question. Would you please explain to us where the previous rule went wrong, and how the Biden rule is proposing to correct it? And also, when do you anticipate the new rule will be finalized?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Senator Carper. So the Congress expected that EPA would write a fees rule to collect 25% of our authorized Tsca costs from fees. The first fees rule didn't collect any fees until fiscal year 2019, and it exempted the costs of the first 10 risk evaluations from being subject to fees at all. And those were by far the most expensive thing that the agency was working on in those first 4 years of the law. So as a result, we only collected a couple $1 million a year, $2 to $5 million a year in the first couple of years under the new law. And moreover, to calculate the 25% baseline, the previous administration used the costs of the old Tsca before it was revised to expand EPA's authority. So as a result, overall, that first fees rule collected less than half of the 25% of authorized Tsca costs that Congress expected it to collect. So we've done things differently. We have tried to heed congressional direction to reflect the accurate costs of implementing the law in our proposed fees rule. I think that rule's in the final stages of review at OMB, and I expect it to be finalized in the coming weeks.
All right, good, thanks. Senator Capito.
an incredible amount of clothing, and a lot of this clothing is generated by companies that promote fast fashion. And so there have been studies showing that our consumption of clothing has increased rapidly over the past 5 to 10 years, and that could be contributing, but I don't think the exact cause is known.
So if we just buy maybe less clothing, we could maybe make a difference here. What do you think?
Like
Maybe
others,
not.
yeah.
I say that with tongue-in-cheek. Next
Sure.
question. In addition to retrofitting technologies in our washing machines to capture microplastics from our clothing, are there other innovations that can reduce the amount of microfibers in our water systems? I like to find out what works, do more of that. If there are other countries, other places where they figured out how to do this better, and we could learn from them. What can we learn from them? Are any actions that Congress should consider to reduce microfiber shedding? Thank you.
Sure. Is that an additional question?
It's a two-part question.
Sure. I'm working
We only get paid for one.
Yes, fair enough. A nonprofit that I collaborate with in California is actually looking into solutions such as textiles that shed less, as well as textiles that are produced from materials like kelp. So producing textiles from sustainable materials that can also capture carbon. So those are solutions that are both being looked into currently that could potentially reduce microfiber shedding over the long term.
Anybody else on this? That's the second question. What can we learn from others with respect to this this challenge, this problem? I'd like to say, find out what works, do more of that. Anybody else in another country maybe is doing a better job than we are?
I don't know that there's other countries that are doing better. I think that there are people looking into it, and Patagonia is another company that's looking into it heavily as well. So I think that there's some important science out there that's trying to understand kind of why the clothing sheds as much as it does, and are there things that can do to mitigate that. Natural-based polymers are another solution, although they still have the same chemicals that are used in them. And so that's still a concern, because as they degrade, they biodegrade, but they're still toxic. So.
All right, thank you. Is it Alsbach? How do you pronounce your name?
Allspaw, Senator.
Has your name ever been mispronounced?
Many times. I take whatever's close.
All right. Question for you, and maybe for our others. Are there any areas of research noted in the draft strategy that the federal government should prioritize? And are there any further topics for future studies on micro and nanoplastics not included in the draft strategy that the federal government maybe should consider?
Yeah, I think probably the most important area that could require funding is the development of analytical methods, as I mentioned in my testimony, because as several of the other speakers have mentioned as well, we really don't have very good understanding about the occurrence of nanoplastics in the environment, in our water supplies. And until we understand that occurrence, we really can't conduct meaningful treatability or toxicity studies to really understand, in turn, how we should take action about microplastics.
Okay. Dr. Mason, we're not going to let you get out of here without a question. And I think in your testimony you described that extended producer responsibility policies are one of the most powerful tools that policymakers have to decrease plastic pollution, including the resulting microplastic pollution we see in our marine environment. Question. Will you please expand on how extended producer responsibility policies can be an effective tool for reducing plastic pollution and subsequently reduce microplastic pollution?
So from my understanding of how they work, the companies are charged for the plastic that they utilize, that they produce. They're charged less if they choose a polymer that's more easily recycled, like polyethylene or polypropylene, versus something like polystyrene or polyvinyl chloride that can't be recycled. And obviously, if they switch away from using plastics at all, they're not paying for it. That money then also adds into infrastructure for the recycling system, which right now is being borne by the taxpayers and hence is consistently underfunded. And this is one of the reasons why the recycling of plastics is so bad, is because we need better funding mechanisms to support the infrastructure around recycling. And so this is a mechanism to provide that support for the recycling industry. And while at the same time shifting the market to fewer polymers, because right now, I mean, another issue we have with recycling of plastics is that there's thousands of different polymers that are on the marketplace. And so to recycle them, you have to separate them each from each other. And you can't do that through mechanical means. You would need FTIR, you need scanners, you need a different type of mechanism, and our current recycling infrastructure doesn't have that in place. So one of the reasons why we have such a hard time recycling plastics is the separation of the different plastics from each other. So if we can reduce the number of polymers that are on the marketplace, it enables better recycling, and on top of that, you've got a funding mechanism to support that recycling initiative. And then you're using, your roles, right, to get the outcome that you want from the system that is in place. And that's ultimately, right, what we can do as Congress, what you guys can do as Congress is you have systems in place, but you can use your leverage, use your different levers in order to produce the outcome that you want. And right now, the recycling infrastructure is awful. So extended corporate responsibility is a good way to leverage to get the outcome that you're looking for.
Our thanks to each of you. Mr. Chairman, my wife studied at the University of Tennessee undergraduate fibers and textiles, later worked for DuPont for 30-some years in the same business, and then taught as a professor at the University of Delaware, actually courses that relate to this as well. She's going to interest, I don't know how many people like tune in and look at the reruns of our hearings, but she's going to be tuning in tonight and sends her best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Mullen.
Make me nervous. My wife's.
The 3 R's. Can't get away from that. You mentioned the Golden Gate Bridge, which a lot of us are familiar with. There's also a Golden Gate Park. And when we were not deployed overseas, my squadron was back in California, and I got to go to the very first Earth Day in Golden Gate Park. And the speaker that day was Ralph Nader. And he had written a best-selling book, some of you may recall, called Unsafe at Any Speed. It was written about my car, the Chevrolet Corvair. So an air-cooled engine in back, and it had a way of going around a curve. You go around a real sharp curve. It would like change directions, and you'd find yourself going the opposite direction. And the other thing we found out is that in the winter, when you turn on the heater, carbon monoxide would come out of the heater. So when I was at Ohio State, I bought it when I was like a senior at Ohio State. And when young women at Ohio State found out that my car was a Corvair, it was hard to get dates in the winter. And but I lived to make it to Pensacola, Florida, and sold it for $1. And bought myself a Volkswagen Karmann Ghia, which I think I ended up with like 200,000 miles on it. So, but it started with the Corvair Monza, great memories. And I want to say thank you for your leadership in California, and thank you very much for your leadership here. We have a bunch of all of us serve on a number of committees. I have served on about 3 or 4 others, and some of my colleagues do, and a lot of those committees are meeting right now. And our members are going to kind of try to pop in as to the extent that they can. But until they do, I'm going to proceed to just to ask questions. My next question would be of Dr. Johnson of you. But several countries, as we may know, including Canada, and I think France is one of them, have established extended producer responsibility laws. And recently, I think we've had some mention here today of Colorado, Maine, California, and Oregon have passed their own laws for consumer packaging. We've heard both pros and cons to these laws. And one concern we've heard from stakeholders is about the challenges we heard here today, of the challenges of a patchwork state-by-state approach to recycling policies, such as differing labeling requirements. I mentioned the National Governors Association actually has an entity that is in place for to actually share good ideas with one another, and to find out what works and do more of that. But the question It's called Center for Best Practices within the NGA, and it's a great organization. It's still very active, and we try to work with them in ways that are helpful to the federal government, to Congress, and also to state and local governments. Dr. Johnson, a follow-up question for you. Would you please share some of your experiences as a global business working with national and international extended producer responsibility laws, and what are some of the challenges that SC Johnson has faced in complying with these laws, and how might the regulatory entities address those challenges?
So I think there's some good models of EPR legislation out there. I would hold British Columbia up as an excellent example. You shared that as an example earlier, Senator, where they've been able to achieve high recovery rates and very high access to recycling for the population in British Columbia. Some of the challenges that we've had, revolve more around transparency of fees. The one thing that I would like to see more of in extended producer responsibility regulation is more of a push on reuse and refill. And that is, probably one of the best approaches to minimizing environmental impact. And I'd just like to share an example, if I could. 12 years ago, we launched a concentrate which you could put in this Windex bottle and fill it with water. So you can reuse this trigger bottle, 100 times if you wanted. It's got, that is the best environmental footprint for this kind of product. But it doesn't sell very well. Most consumers, plastic is just not top of mind enough for them to want to go through the inconvenience of putting a concentrate in here and refilling this bottle. And it just comes back to it's very hard for an individual company to make progress with these kinds of innovations. But if we have things in the regulation that could help incentivize these kinds of things and bring scale at retail, if retailers had 30% of their space devoted to refill, reuse options, if, many companies created those options for their brand, if we had education programs, if we had subsidies, that could help this kind of innovation. France has put in their regulation a minimum amount of retail space that you've got to devote to these options. The United Kingdom is giving subsidies for refill stations in Europe. We have over 700 refill stations for a laundry detergent brand in Europe. And those kinds of things work, and I would love to see that kind of added to a regulation that we could have federally here in the United States.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Simon, and again, probably Dr. Johnson, but we'll start off with you. Ms. Simon, as I mentioned, I think in my opening statement, some materials have more viable markets for repurchasing than others, as you know. It's known as end markets. I believe that's what they call end markets. So, for example, paper is recycled at almost 70%. And recycled paper is often put back into products for resale. But plastic products do not have the same recovery rate or value as a recycled product. A question, I think for you and maybe for Dr. Johnson as well. How can extended producer responsibility policies establish new end markets for recycled materials? Ms. Simon.
Well, every single one of the materials that we depend on for single use today, whether it's paper, aluminum, glass, or plastic, comes from a resource and comes with impact, right? So we should be making our best effort to make sure all of those materials are getting recycled. And they all end up in the same blue bin. So when we're talking about an extended producer responsibility scheme at the federal level, we need to be considering all of those materials at once and how we can create design standards, and eco-modulation to enhance and improve the way those materials are designed for recycling and for the infrastructure and technologies needed to most efficiently recycle them, so that we have high-value materials on the back end for all of that, right? So maybe the improvement from paper up is, not as high as it would be because we have a much lower starting point for other materials, but that improvement is still needed because paper and paperboard are the materials within that blue bin that absorb the most of the contaminants, right? And because they are on the lower end of the amount of times you can recycle them, those contaminants actually have a bigger impact on the strength of those fibers when they're being recycled. So I think there is mutual benefit that can happen across all materials for those secondary markets.
Thank you. Dr. Johnson?
I would just say that a key tenet of extended producer responsibility regulation and a key responsibility of the producer organization is to help create those end-of-life markets. If you look at the British Columbia example, today over 99% of what they collect goes into an end market, and that's been improved over time. And again, I think eco-modulation is an important tenet as well. You create a plastic pollution hierarchy, and you create an incentive system to move products from going into landfill or waste to energy up to higher value, more circular markets. And to me, that's a very helpful and important principle in extended producer responsibility regulation.
But let me just follow up with that. Would say, how important are viable end markets for a company like yours that's trying to use more recycled content in your packaging materials?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
How important are viable end markets for a company like yours that's trying to use more recycled content in packaging materials?
It's extremely important, and it, what regulation does is it creates scale. It creates scale and supply of post-consumer recycled plastic, which is important to us because we're meeting our own internal goals of using recycled plastic. It's important for us to see that even today, some of the hard-to-recycle things get into even downcycled markets. So to me, it's a critical part of regulation.
Good, thank you. I think that's my questions. I think those are my questions. I want to mention a couple of things if I can. Senator Capito, Senator Bozeman, and I have provided leadership in introducing two significant pieces of legislation to deal with recycling. We've talked about it many times in this room. Some of you are familiar with them. They passed out of committee, I think unanimously. We have very broad support within the Senate, and in an effort to try to reconcile our legislation with what's going on in the House. We've stumbled over something it's called in the Senate, it's called a hold, H-O-L-D, and a member of the Senate, Democrat or Republican, put a hold in some cases on legislation that he or she has concerns about. One of our colleagues, Senator Lee of Utah, has lifted his hold. He has lifted his hold, we learned this morning, on the two recycling bills that this committee has moved earlier in this Congress that we talked about here even today with Senator Capito has provided a lot of leadership on that, along with Senator Bozeman and our staff's great staff work on that, and we appreciate very much the decision by Senator Lee to lift his hold. We're going to be, Senator Capito and I are going to be working, and our staff's going to be working with, we call it with the floor. I don't know how you work with the floor in the Senate, but the folks who work the floor for the Democratic and Republican leadership, see if we can't move these two recycling bills as soon as possible so we can work with the House to get them to President Biden's desk. So it's a piece of good news. We don't always have good news, but that's good news, and we're real happy and grateful to Senator Lee for what he has done. Before we wrap it up, one of the things I like to do. Well, I'm always looking for consensus. How do we build consensus? How do we build consensus here across political lines? How do we build consensus between the House and the Senate? How do we build consensus with states and governors and other levels of government? I'm going to ask you in closing, if you would, just to maybe close with each of you with like a thought or two in terms of actually taking us closer to consensus on something, an issue of significance relating to recycling. It could be what we're talking about today. It could be something else that's related to what we're talking about today. But what, and just a thought, maybe we're not asking a question that triggered a response. What else do you think you want to kind of leave us? You had a chance to give an opening statement. I want you to give just a short closing statement with some real wisdom, and you've already given us a lot of that already. I'm going to ask Mr. Felton if you would just lead us off, and then we'll wrap it up with Ms. Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. 3 quick thoughts. One is consensus is critical, and we need people at the table. And I'm not suggesting the people here in the room today are not at the table, but one thing Ameripan has discovered over the last 4 years is we're only going to solve these problems if all stakeholders sit down together, and that is what consensus is. So encourage those who are not currently engaged in this issue to follow hearings like this, understand the complexities of it, and move forward with us. 2 other things I want to say. I do want to mention that while we have, I believe 40 countries around the world that have EPR in place, many of those programs were set up 20 and 30 years ago for a different set of packaging, a different set of technology. These programs are continuing to evolve, so as we point towards other countries and what they're doing right. I think we need to be mindful of that, and we need to be mindful that I think we need a unique United States solution as well for the way that things are set up here in the United States. My last comment is data, data, data. We need data.
You say data?
Data, yeah, I did 3 times. We need that desperately. And I think there's a role for the federal government to help with that. So as we're looking to find consensus, looking to drive industry interests and environmental interests and state interests, is we lack data that is desperately needed, and we need to work more on that.
Good. I think one of the pieces of legislation that, one of the 2 pieces I talked about,
it does
speaks to that issue, and which is good. So
yeah,
we've been responsive. Thank you for the encouragement. Dr. Johnson.
You know, I would just say, obviously, consensus is important. Far be it from me to suggest what might help build that. I would just say that, you know, given the emerging state regulations, that federal regulation will help prevent over-regulation. And I think that should be important for everybody. I would also say that this is an important emerging issue. I know you talked about microplastic last week. That, I think, is becoming a very important human health issue that needs to be solved. And I think if there's anything with urgency around it, it's that. But I appreciate the opportunity today to share my views. So thank you.
We're delighted you could join us again. Thank you for sharing your views with us. Ms. Simon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity once again. When you talk about consensus, it makes me think about the process that's happening in parallel to this in the United Nations around the treaty, where it is the goal, right, for all of those member states to come together and find a common path forward against a shared threat. And that is really hard to do in quite a divisive world, as it can be to find paths forward in the U.S., but an interesting thing has emerged in these negotiations and in the momentum in the U.S. is that where we have common ground from more players than ever before is on extended producer responsibility. We may have different reasons for why we want it, but ultimately we all need better, more harmonized standards. We need better collection, we need better processing, and we need better secondary materials. So that is fairly common, and I think why you see more excitement and activity from the private sector on this. They want that more than anything. I want to add one thing. I didn't get a chance to comment on the cost thing earlier, and I was hoping I could just add a few thoughts. Pardon?
You didn't get
On the cost to
Okay.
the consumer. I think the cost is already on the consumer in the form of plastic waste today, and municipalities that are currently dealing with that. So I think we need to make sure we're considering where these costs are falling as we do the full balance sheet for what an EPR system would do. Mayors in the Midwest, part of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, are talk about cost as one of the challenges they faced in how it's coming down to the local taxpayers. Those mayors will be on the Hill tomorrow to talk about their support of EPR also. And Washington has done some studies that have shown that there are benefits to it, coming back in the form of $600 to $300 a year by not having to pay for trash services. So I think there's an opportunity to find that common ground and where there can be those benefits to businesses, those benefits to the government, and those benefits to the communities who really need it. So thank you again for the opportunity and appreciate it.
We thank you all. I hope your work provides you as much joy and satisfaction as our work provides for us. People who follow the news and follow what goes in Washington think that we don't like each other and can't stand working with one another. And that could not be further from the truth, at least with respect to many of the issues before this committee. We have a lot of mutual respect. We have a great, I think, great track record in things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which we were involved in helping to write, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which has huge climate provisions in it, some of which we talked a little bit about here today. But Winston, not Winston, I was going to say Winston Churchill, but another great leader it's a statue of him a couple of miles from where we're gathered here today. And it's our former president, Abraham Lincoln. And one of my favorite Lincoln quotes is, in response to the question, what is the role of government? What is the role of government? Lincoln used to say the role of government is to do for the people what they cannot do for themselves. The role of government is to do for the people what we cannot do for themselves. There's a lot of wisdom in that. And one of the ways that the government works best is when we do it in a collaborative way and look for common ground, trying to find ways to harness market forces where that works, and realize that there's a moral imperative for this. This is the only planet we're going to have. There's no planet B. And we've got to take care of this planet if we care about our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And I know if we're lucky enough to have those that we want to make sure they have a wonderful place to inherit and to raise their own families someday. But we appreciate your thoughtful insights into what can be a complex topic. And we look forward to remaining in touch with you if we can find you. In a good way. And we want to stay in touch with you and with our committee so that we can really reach some of the best most thoughtful policies and advance these and other shared goals. I want to say a special thanks to Senator Capito, to her staff, to our majority staff, and to the staff of all of our colleagues who participate in helping to select you to be our witnesses and provided some of the questions that have been asked here today. I get to do a little bit of housekeeping here to close out our hearing, and I want to ask. This is my favorite part of the hearing. I want to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a variety of materials that include letters from stakeholders and other materials that relate to today's hearing. And when I ask unanimous consent and there's no other senator to object, then I can pretty much run the show. So without objection, there you go. Senators are going to be allowed to submit questions for the record through the close of business on Wednesday. That's March 20th, and we'll compile those questions. We'll send them to our witnesses, and we'll ask all of you to respond, if you could, by Wednesday, April the 3rd. And on a place where sometimes we don't have great news every day, the news about our friend Senator Lee lifting his hold on our recycling bills is a wonderful piece of news. And I think folks who might have been tuned in across the country are probably encouraged by your testimony and what you've presented to us today and the questions that our members ask. While you've been testifying here for the last almost hour and a half, we've just had a really impressive group of young people coming into the hearing, and there's the seats for folks who might be watching us on C-SPAN or television. We have a number of people can sit in the hearing room. We have seats for maybe 50, 60, 70 people, and but we've had probably 100 or more young people. They look like they're in maybe high school or maybe college that are coming. They could have gone to any hearing. We have a lot of committees. They could have gone to any hearing. They could have gone to see the House in order or in session or the Senate over in the Capitol. They came here. They came here by the dozens. And they came here because they know this is important. And this is important for them in their lives and the families that they'll raise someday. We don't want to let them down. We don't want to let them down. And I'm proud to say that I think on this committee we're not letting them down. And with your help, we'll continue to do that. And with that, this hearing is a wrap. Thank you all very much. We're adjourned.
Questions you may have. Thank you.
Good. Well, we welcome each of you today. Thanks for your life's work. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us and our colleagues and our guests. We've heard. We're going to provide 5 minutes per member for questioning, and I'll try to keep us close to that. But we'll offer opportunities for multiple rounds. I hope. But I would just say to Simon and Dr. Johnson, with respect to fee setting, we've heard in your testimonies that a system that assigns fees based upon the environmental impact of a product is an important aspect of an extended producer responsibility policy. For example, difficult to recycle plastic films may have a higher fee than a recyclable cereal box. Question start with Ms. Simon, if you would. Would you expand for us, please, on how this fee-setting process can work as a tool and extended producer responsibility policies to support both downstream and upstream changes in our recycling system?
Absolutely. So when we talk about this fee setting, the term that is being used often today is called eco-modulation. It's a way to...
What's it called?
Eco-modulation. I don't know if it's a real word. But
I have words like that, too.
spell check does not like it. But what it essentially is about is sort of a fee modulation around criteria for the packaging, right? So if we want to improve our recycling system, we need to start by making sure that we are standardizing the design of those materials to match the technology and the infrastructure. By doing that, you get better efficiency on the back end, higher quality materials. They'll have a higher value to have longer term contracts, right? And so to incentivize that, to incentivize design for that, you can create a fee modulation system or an eco-modulation where you incentivize producers to design for that system or design above that, right? Use recycled content, use less. And you can also disincentivize, right? You can disincentivize problematic materials, problematic colorants, labels, additives, so that they pay a higher fee, right? That way they are no longer... If they are degrading the quality of that feedstock, they are paying to degrade it. Additionally, it can create the need for transparency in the system, which can help avoid some of the concerns around toxic chemicals in recycling. If there's better transparency, the material recycling facility will have the ability to opt out of those materials, and it'll have us give us the opportunity to have better visibility of how we improve upon reducing those problematic chemicals in the future. So fee modulation is a way to sort of take a tool that could be just for financing recycling and use it for a bit more than that.
All right, thank you, thank you. Dr. Johnson, would you please share with us any views that you have regarding the same topic?
Yeah, I would just simply say that I would support as a key tenet of EPR this kind of eco-modulation. And what we've seen in some EPR schemes is they create a pollution prevention hierarchy. So, you know, the worst being plastic going into landfill, waste to energy, downcycling to recycling to reuse, refill, and fees are based on where, you know, the end of life of your product is relative to that hierarchy. And I think it's a good incentive system for companies like ourselves to make our products more recyclable, to improve our PCR content, and just have continuous improvement in the system. A number of EPR schemes don't have that, but we would certainly promote having that kind of system in EPR.
All right, great, thanks. Senator Capito.
Thank you.
Thank you. Not a month ago, the Democrats and Republicans joined together here on this floor to pass bipartisan legislation to provide for better, much better security at the border, and to make sure that folks from other countries who have a desire to work, ability to work, that are not a threat to our safety or security, they could provide be provided an opportunity to help make this a better country. It's a bipartisan vote, Democrat and Republicans. I just want to commend the Republicans who joined the Democrats in voting for it. The legislation has died in the House, at least for now, and my hope is that the House will see fit to join us in the Senate to pass common sense, much needed border security legislation. Having said that, Mr. President, I arrived today I came here today to talk about the passage in the Senate earlier this week of the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act and the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act of 2023. Two pieces of bipartisan legislation that, if enacted, will improve our nation's recycling and our nation's composting systems. As a number of our colleagues know, I care a lot about recycling, I care a lot about composting. I have ever since I was a kid. In fact, I think in our home in Wilmington, Delaware, we recycle everything in recent years, from a dehumidifier in our basement and a Ford Explorer out in our driveway. And then we recycle a whole lot more. We do it every week. And I know a lot of other folks in our neighborhood, a lot of other folks in our state do so as well. But in our country, we can always do everything better. Always do things better, and we need to. During my time in the U.S. Senate, I've looked for and I've found many opportunities for bipartisan support of policies that boost recycling, that boost composting. And as my colleagues on this floor have heard me say many, many times, bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. I believe that with every fiber of my being. To that end, earlier this Congress, Senator Capito, a ranking member of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, and along with Senator John Bozeman from Arkansas, and I worked to advance bipartisan legislation through our committee, through the Committee on Environment and Public Works, that would strengthen our nation's recycling, composting, and sustainability efforts. Moreover, we know that recycling is a win-win. Why do I say that? It not only benefits our environment, but it also creates economic opportunity, creates a lot of jobs, a whole lot of jobs, not just in Delaware, but in every state across the country. When enacted, the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act and the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act of 2023 will address several of the challenges that America's recycling efforts currently face, including the lack of good data, including limited access to recycling programs in many parts, too many parts of our country. To increase the amount of high-quality data available on recycling efforts across America, Senator Bozeman and I developed a legislation. It's called the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act. Our bill would improve the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to gather data on this nation's recycling systems and explore opportunities for implementing a national composting strategy. Well, so some people probably say, what is composting and why is that important? Well, I'm excited about the idea of a national composting strategy because implementing such a strategy will help us reduce food waste, which is responsible for over half, that's right, over half of our planet's warming methane emissions that emanate from landfills. I'll say that again. I'm excited about the idea of national composting strategy. Why? Because implementing such a strategy will help us reduce food waste. Food waste is responsible for over half, that's right, over half of our planet warming methane emissions that emanate from landfills. To increase access to recycling programs, Senator Capito, Senator Bozeman and I introduced the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act of 2023. Why did we do that? To create a pilot program at EPA to help expand recycling services in underserved areas. Many Americans in rural and underserved communities want to recycle. They want to compost, but they're unable to do so because they live in areas that lack the necessary recycling infrastructure, including curbside pickup or community collection centers. In comparison to our neighbors, how are we doing? I have a friend who asks me how he's doing. He says, compared to what? Well, why don't we compare ourselves to Canada and maybe Germany? Well, compared to Canada, compared to Canada, we've got a lot of work to do. For example, British Columbia, our neighbors to the north, they're currently recycling 86% of their residential waste, 86%. And across to the pond over in Germany, they're recycling almost half, 48% to be exact, of their waste. Yep, 48%. I wish I could say that we're doing as well, but unfortunately today in America, our national recycling rate is not even a third. It's just under that, 32%. We can do better than that. We've got to do better than that. And these two bills will help us to improve our recycling efforts to make the goal set by EPA to increase the U.S. recycling efforts, bring it up to 50% by year 2030. I think people given a choice would like to recycle them. They like to compost more, and we've got to make it easy for them to do. Both of the bills that I've mentioned are the results of true collaboration and reflect a bipartisan commitment to exploring and addressing our nation's recycling and composting challenges and opportunities. We have a moral duty to leave behind a cleaner, healthier planet for future generations, and that's a belief I know is shared by most Americans. Now that the Senate has passed both of these bills, I welcome all of our House colleagues to join us in this effort. And I want to say to the presiding officer who's presiding, my colleague from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a member of the Senate Committee on the Environment and Public Works, I want to thank him for being part of the effort that has enabled us to bring this legislation to the floor. I believe without opposition. I believe without opposition, with the total bipartisan support of the Democrat and Republican members. And hopefully we'll be able to convince our friends over in the House that we come up with some pretty good ideas over here in the Senate from time to time. And these are a couple of them. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Prevent it when we can, attack it when it's there, and work on mitigating it before and cleaning up after. So thank you. I thank you all for being here and everything you're doing. This is critical, critical work to every community across America. I hope we don't need to, I hope that all the mitigation prevention works so we aren't having to respond, but I'm grateful that you're thinking about the best ways to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Carper, recognized for your questions.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks again for giving me a chance to talk a little bit about not just addressing the symptoms of problems and challenges, but also addressing the root causes. So now I've been to another hearing, now I'm back here. I I want to ask a couple of questions. I want to ask a question I think, from Mr. Curry initially, involving how do we improve coordination between FEMA and local authorities? And after that, I want to ask a question, Dr. Moore-Merrill, so how do we better support at-risk communities? So before I do that, let me just say that our planet's on fire. It's not just the western part of this country. Our planet's on fire. And NOAA tells us, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration tells us that last year was the hottest year on the planet. Hottest in the year, as far as, way back as far as we can look, hottest year. They have a bicycle race in France the year before that, Tour de France. They had to just call off parts of the race because the pavement was melting on the race. So it's not it's not just incidental to the western part of this country. It's not just sea level rise on the eastern seaboard and other places. It's a real, and as we try to address the symptoms of these challenges, and that's important. It's also important that we continue to focus on root causes. So, Mr. Curry, if I could, with respect to improving coordination between FEMA and local authorities, the evidence is, we think, is pretty clear. The threat of wildfire is escalating at a rapid pace and posing significant risks to the health and safety of communities, not just out west, but across our country. Wildfires are not only more frequent, they are also more destructive than ever before and more likely to burn hotter because of climate change. Extreme and persistent drought create drier fuel for those fires, and its accumulation over years creates the conditions that lead to high temperature firestorms that are extremely dangerous and move fast. The result is more loss of life and more loss of property. The FEMA plays a critical role in assisting state and local authorities in reducing the risk to our environment, our infrastructure, and our public health. And the GAO, Government Accountability Office, has conducted audits in recent years looking into the federal government's role in wildfire management. Question for you, Mr. Curry. Through the various audits and reviews that GAO has conducted, how can the federal government better improve its coordination with state and local authorities? I put my old recovering governor hat on. How can we better coordinate with state and local authorities to more productively address the impact and risk of wildfires?
Thank you, sir. Senator Rosen laid this out really well. I think what we need to do with wildfires is we need to treat them or prepare for them and respond to them the same way we do for hurricanes. And I'll just use a Delaware analogy.
I love it when our witnesses do this. We'll get more time for your testimonies.
So if we expect a hurricane to landfall in Delaware, we also declare an emergency. We don't just declare an emergency in Delaware. We declare an emergency in Maryland, Virginia, and maybe even a couple states north or south of that, because they're unpredictable. We know it's going to be bad, and we just go ahead and assume that's going to happen so we can take all the necessary steps to do that. I think the extent to which, that's not how it works in wildfire. We sort of wait and hope it doesn't happen. We hope it doesn't cross from federal or rural land into a populated area. That's just got to change. That mentality and whatever sort of rules and legislation are potentially behind that needs to change. The other thing we can do to improve coordination, I think FEMA particularly has gotten pretty good in terms of coordination with state and local on response. Recovery programs are the challenge. All these recovery programs across the 30 different agencies of the federal government that provide some type of assistance, they were never designed to work together for recovery. So like Senator Langford said with the permitting, they all have different rules, requirements, timeframes, and they're not designed to work in concert together. And so what happens is at the state and local level, that's just a very, very frustrating process in the years of recovery after.
All right, thank you for that. I noticed some of your colleagues up there nodding their heads and trying to wish they had a Delaware example they could offer as well. Dr. Moore-Merrill, if you could, I already telegraphed my pitch, but question with respect to supporting at-risk communities. And fire departments in Delaware and across our country are depending more and more, as you know, on federal assistance to effectively respond to wildfires as the threat level has increased over time. As my colleagues on this committee have heard me say more than a few times, we got to find out what works. We got to do more of that. And what specific measures are the U.S. Fire Administration and FEMA taking to ensure timely and adequate support for at-risk communities, particularly in terms of healthcare and infrastructure resources. And also, how can we build on successful efforts to keep up with the increasing threat level of these devastating wildfires?
Thank you for the question, sir. Yes, USFA is certainly leaning into our communities and particularly their vulnerability to wildfires. We've noted throughout the hearing today the impacts of climate change, which you've brought up already, the various impacts. We've looked at the vulnerabilities of our land areas and where we're building communities toward fire-prone geographies. And so this continues to escalate our risk. We have to lean into, and where USFA was leading, to advocate for building codes that are based on science. We're advocating for technology to be able to be introduced. We're advocating for more and more complete data, quality data that can be leveraged to help us understand the fire risk index, not just in the wild land space, but once a fire hits communities, we have no idea today the dynamic nature of that fire. And so, yes, we can equate it to hurricanes, and we should elevate it to that recognition level. But what we cannot do, like a hurricane, there is no cone for a fire. So we can look at the cone on hurricanes, we can prepare for evacuation. In fire, we do not have that. So there is one caveat. Evacuating communities is very dynamic. And this is a challenge that I will say to you, we are leaning in heavily on wildfire evacuation, how we're going to prepare communities to understand. Right now, we use a ready, set, go. Well, ready and set should be already happening, not in the midst of a fire. And so we have to understand that when we hit go, that's in the midst of a fire. If we have not leaned into preparing our people across the nation to be able to evacuate, then we're going to have issues like the Paradise Fire, where we had 85 people trapped on the egress route, like Lahaina, where it was so fast, the time for evacuation was minimized. And so there are dynamics of wildfire that do not match the hurricane model that I don't want to lose base. The other thing I'd say, Senator, is highlighting, as you have in our communities, the real effect of continuing structure fires. So it's not always a wildfire that starts with vegetation. We have structure to structure spread that happened in Lahaina that becomes conflagrations in our communities, but also we have already lost in homes where people should be their safest. Almost 600 people since January 1 have died in their homes. That doesn't mean all of the people who've been displaced. This is from fire in general. You said America's burning. I'm going to echo that. America is burning, and we need to be attentive to all methods of fire that is bringing that about.
Mr. Chairman, could I have maybe another minute? Thanks very much. Yesterday, Democrats, senators gathered to hold our annual caucus retreat. Issues, it was just a wonderful time to share ideas and what's working, what's not. Republicans had a similar kind of caucus, I believe, yesterday. And one of the things I mentioned to my colleagues yesterday is about, in terms of what's actually causing this, the root causes behind these, our planet on fire. About 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions in this country are coming from our mobile sources, our cars, trucks, and vans that we drive. And probably another 25% comes from power plants that generate our electricity, coal-fired plants, natural gas-fired plants. And maybe another 20% comes from manufacturing operations. Think asphalt plants, think steel mills. Those are the three majors, 30%. 25%, 20. That's like 3/4 of the root causes, and it contributes to this problem. We're working on all of those as a country. We're working on a lot of those and trying to provide maybe some inspiration for provide leadership for the rest of the world. So I just want to know that we're not just addressing the symptoms of these problems, which are tragic, but we're also going after the root causes, and we're all in this together. So thank you very, very much.
If I may, sir, sure. On the greenhouse gases, wildfires themselves produce greenhouse gases that then contribute to climate change or are causing the drought that help perpetuate wildfires. So this becomes a very circular in nature problem. So thank you for recognizing that.
Thank you. Thanks, and thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Carper. Mr. Curry, the GAO has issued a number of reports on the federal government's emergency management efforts on wildfires.
Thank you. Okay, Senator Carper, then followed by Senator Grassley.
Yeah, thanks so much. think it was 14 months ago that you sat at this table, and behind you was not your leadership team from the IRS, but your wife, your kids, your parents, and I thanked them at the time for sharing you with all of us, and just convey to them I still feel that way, and I'm encouraged by the leadership that you're providing. I want to say to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, but some of us previously served as governor. In Delaware, we don't have an IRS. We have a Delaware Division of Revenue. We used to provide lousy service, and we didn't do a very good job collecting taxes that were owed. And we went to work on that. We didn't fix it in a year. We didn't even fix it in one term, but we fixed it in 8 years. And after I stepped down, the year that I stepped down as governor of the state of Delaware, Delaware Division of Revenue earned and received the Quality Award for Service among all the businesses, nonprofits in the state of Delaware. The Quality Award is like, are you kidding? No, we're not. We learned to provide great service. We learned to do a better job of collecting the revenues that were owed, and we balanced our budgets 8 years in a row, in large part because we had done that. And so it can be done. It can't be done overnight. It can't be done without support, and it can't be done without leadership. Thank you for providing that leadership. I want to talk a little bit about direct file, if we can. Direct file program, we talked about it already, but it's been a major step toward improving the taxpayer experience. And this year, taxpayers in, I think, 12 states could directly file with the IRS through direct file. And we look forward to working with you and your team to build on the success of this year's pilot, to bring direct file to taxpayers in all 50 states, including the first state of Delaware. Question. Commissioner Werfel, does the IRS plan on continuing the direct file program for next tax filing season? And do you plan on expanding the scope of the program for the next filing season, and if so, how?
Senator, as we sit here today, direct file pilot is still ongoing because Massachusetts is one of our pilot states. And because of Patriots Day, they have until April 17th to file. So the pilot isn't done yet. Here's the plan. Once the pilot is complete, we will gather the data, and we've already started gathering the data, and we will report out publicly the information, including cost. And Senator Crapo mentioned in his remarks cost estimate that may exceed $100 million. I'm not seeing that in some of the early data that's coming in, not even close to that. So I'm looking forward to having a public discussion around what we saw, what the demand was, what the performance of the product was, and what the cost was once the pilot wraps up, and we're a couple of days away from that. Once we can get that information out into the public space, I would expect we're going to hear from some stakeholders, and we're going to hear from taxpayers, and we're going to hear from states, and we're going to hear from members of this committee and members from House Ways and Means, and then we'll make a decision. I'll consult with Secretary Yellen, and we'll make a decision about the future of direct file. The results have been encouraging. There was significant demand for the product. When we released it on March 8th to the broader public, we anticipated at that time, based on traffic, that we would see about 100,000 users by April 15th. We blasted through 100,000 on April 13th or 14th, and we're still getting more returns in. So demand exceeded what we thought the day we launched the product widely. And then in terms of cost, we're still gathering information, but I don't see anything in the data, early data, that points to over-exorbitant costs. But again, we want to have that public discussion, and then we want to make a decision as transparently as we can.
Good, thank you for that. I'm going to stick with this direct file for just another moment, if I could. How can Congress, how can we on this side of the dais support the direct file program and ensure that more states, including my state, can participate next year?
Yeah, I think it's about making sure there's balanced information out there about what the ambition of direct file is. It's intended to be an option, not intended to be mandatory. It's still taxpayers preparing their own taxes. It's not the IRS preparing the taxes for you. It's that people can opt out of it anytime they want and switch products. And we want to hear from taxpayers in Delaware and other states More broadly, what do they want from the IRS to make the tax filing process as seamlessly and easy as possible? How can we reduce their stress? A lot of taxpayers are telling us a free solution to work direct with the IRS online is one option we'd like to have. We might not use it, but we want it on the menu. We want to hear from your citizens in Delaware what they think so that we can be ever more informed in how we serve taxpayers most effectively.
Good, thanks. Mr. Chairman, when you and I were House members a million years ago, and Senator Grassley was a House member as well, we used to hold a lot of town hall meetings in our respective states. And I remember every year, right around tax filing season, I would host up and down the state. We only have 3 counties, but in every county, we would bring in the Division of Revenue, we'd bring in the IRS. We would help people file their taxes, prepare their taxes. And we would actually have do an exercise where people in the audience could help us balance the budget. And it was very interesting, and we'd have like 50 or 100 people there. One year, we're having a hard time, I think my group was having a hard time, as citizens were having a hard time balancing the budget, and they would work with on defense spending, non-defense spending, we worked on entitlements, and still couldn't balance the budget in the exercise. A lady in the back of the room raised her hand, and I said, yes, ma'am, and she said, we're having a hard time, do you have any thoughts? And I said, well, you haven't thought at all about revenues in trying to get us to this. Revenues are part of the solution. And it's not just raising tax rates and so forth, it's making sure that people who have an income, that they're paying their fair share. The lady in the back of the room, she said, I don't mind paying even more taxes. I just want to make sure that everybody else is paying their fair share. And that's what we're trying to do here. Thank you for helping us with that.
We're gonna move on, but don't think.
Mr. President, long before I ever thought of running for office, I was a little kid born in West Virginia, coal mining town called Beckley. And my sister and I ended up going to the same grade school, not too far from our house. And as a kid, I was pretty well behaved and didn't get into much trouble. But in first grade, I got in a fight. And I got in a fight, some kid was picking on my sister, who was a year older, second grade. And he was a much bigger guy, and it was not a fair fight. And I got involved in it and took him out with one swing. And that was my last punch that I think I've thrown in anger. But I didn't like the idea of a big guy, a bully, trying to push around somebody, whether it's my sister or not. I've never cared for that in other situations, growing up and watching behavior of people in all kinds of different situations. Our country, if you go back to our founding, we were, you recall, we took on the biggest nation on earth, the strongest nation on earth, Great Britain. It was not a fair fight. They had us badly outgunned, outnumbered. And somebody came to our rescue. And the person or the persons that came to our rescue were the French. And if it weren't for the French, we'd still be maybe a colony of Great Britain. But the French stood up and said, we're here to help. There was time for people to stand, countries to stand by and allow things to happen. There's a time to stand up and be heard. We were helped as a nation over 200 years ago by the French. We have, I think, a moral obligation to help make sure that the Ukraine has an opportunity to continue to go forward and to be a democratic nation. They are a democratic nation. They actually they elect their own leaders. And Vladimir Putin doesn't care very much for that. Thinks that they shouldn't be allowed to do so, and has decided to use force to be able to take away the obligation, the opportunity to be a free nation. And we have a couple of opportunities. We can criticize Putin, the Russians, for what they're talking about doing, or we can actually do something about it. I served, I think I may be the last Vietnam veteran serving here in the United States Senate. But if you go out from here, I like to run And some many mornings when I've gone for a run here in the Capitol, I'll run out to the Lincoln Memorial. I run, on my way back, I run right by the Vietnam Memorial. And it's a black granite, and there are names of, I want to say, 50, maybe 59,000 people who died in that war and, that I served in. We got involved in that war. It was not a popular war. It wasn't popular with my generation, but we got involved in that war. The communists, North Vietnam, were coming in and trying to take over the South, and we ended up, for better for worse, siding with the South, and we know what the outcome turned out to be. But a lot of people died. A lot of people died in that war, and I know a number of them. And my guess is my colleagues do as well. I tell that story because we have a situation here. It's not altogether different, in which the Ukrainian people who want to defend themselves, they want to preserve their democracy, and they are willing to make the tough fight if we will help them, and the rest of the free world will help them. God bless our president and leaders of a bunch of other countries who said, we're not going to walk away and let Putin have his way and take away the democracy of the people of Ukraine. We're going to help him. And and we're going to help them not by sending, as we did in the Vietnam War, our own young soldiers, sailors, airmen. We're not going to send them to Ukraine to defend the Ukraine. We're going to send them munitions. We're going to send them drones. We're going to send them missiles. We're going to send them ships, aircraft. We'll do that. And that's really all the Ukrainians are asking for. That's all they're asking for. They're asking for that kind of help. We ought to provide it. We ought to provide it. I used to fly missions. I was a naval flight officer, P-3 aircraft mission commander. We used to fly a lot of surveillance missions around the world, track Soviet submarines everywhere across the planet. We also flew a lot of missions off the coast of Vietnam and a lot of missions in the South China Sea. Even decades ago, when I was flying missions with my squadron in the South China Sea, we were concerned about the militarization of the South China Sea by China, and trying to take over islands that were not theirs, that maybe had been claimed by the Philippines and other nations. And the Chinese were taking them over with the idea of militarizing them and ultimately making maritime trafficking, moving of ships and aircraft through the South China Sea more and more difficult. We used to fly missions in the Vietnam War. We used to fly missions out of Vietnam. By the time in '68, I was commissioned in '68. By that time, we pulled a lot of land-based aircraft, B-52s, P-3s, which is land-based aircraft with the Navy. We pulled them out of Vietnam, and we flew our missions out of Thailand, Utapao, big Air Force base. We flew missions out of Taiwan, a place in the southern part of the island, Tainan, which is an Air Force base in Taiwan. And I had a chance to be deployed there from time to time. Got to know some of the people who lived in Taiwan. Wonderful people, lovely people. And you know what they were concerned about all those years ago? They were concerned about China coming in and taking them over, trying to take away their independence. And not just militarize the South China Sea and to transform a bunch of islands into bases, if you will, for the Chinese military, but to actually take over a democratic country that's never been a part of China and make them do the bidding of China. Mark my word, if Vladimir Putin is successful in prevailing in the Ukraine, if he's successful, Taiwan will be next. As sure as I'm standing here today, President Xi, the leader of China, who says Taiwan is theirs, he'll be right into the hunt, right into the fight. And we have and that would trigger a real world conflict between them and us. Wouldn't be good for either of us, but we would, I think, be beholden to defend Taiwan. But why don't we just bring a halt to that idea of China getting involved and trying to come after Taiwan? Why don't we just, and having to commit our own troops, why don't we just take care of it by making sure that the people of Ukraine have the ships, the aircraft, the tanks, the missiles, the armament that they need to prevail on their own against Russia. We wouldn't have to commit our own troops. Wouldn't have to worry about the kind of body bags that came back from Vietnam when I was serving in the Vietnam War. We would end up with a free Ukraine, and I think we'd have a much better chance of making sure that the folks in Taiwan would continue to enjoy their independence as well. I'm wearing a lapel pin here that people ask me about from time to time, even today. I say, what kind of a lapel pin is that? It's an American flag, and it's a Ukrainian flag as well. And a couple of days after Russia invaded the Ukraine, I sent somebody over from my staff to the Ukrainian embassy to get this lapel pin. I've worn it every day since. Every day since. And I get a lot of people. I go back and forth on the train, as my colleagues know. Live in Delaware, go back and forth on the train almost every day. And it's amazing how many people I run into on the train, at the train stations, or traveling around the country. And they'll say, what is that? What is that you're wearing? And when I explain it, I don't recall one person ever saying, you shouldn't wear that, or that's a bad idea. People say, good for you. Good for you, and we ought to help them. Presiding officer may recall a couple of months ago when, in fact, this year, and maybe last year, President Zelenskyy came here, not to this chamber, but he came into the Senate chamber, the old Senate chamber, just down the hall. And he spoke in a closed room to members of the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, and a very emotional, very compelling language. We laid out the situation that they faced, laid out how important our support was, and how grateful that they were for us willing to stand by them, stand up for them. And his speech was interrupted any number of times by standing ovations by Democrats and by Republicans. I happened to be sitting right in front of his podium where he was speaking, about as far away as our stenographer was standing for me today. And during the course of his speech, a couple of times he had eye contact, and I think I tried to give him encouragement in a sort of way, and I think I did. But when it was over, he walked away from the podium, and I walked up to him, and I shook his hand, and I hugged him. And I don't get to hug national leaders every day, but I hugged him, and he hugged me. And I said to him, "You're a hero." I said to him, "You're a hero." And he reached over and he touched my lapel pin, and he said to me in response, he said, "No." He said, "You are our heroes." He said, "You are our heroes." Now, I just want to say, in the months that have passed since then, when we have floundered, kind of washed around and trying to figure out, are we going to continue to provide aid and support for Ukraine? And I thought, he was back a couple of months later, and I had a chance to talk to him again. And again, he said, you are a hero. You are heroes. Talking about us in this body and in the House of Representatives. And I said to my staff later that day and my colleagues later that day, I said, you know, it's funny, I don't feel much like a hero. There's a couple of months ago when he was here. I don't feel much because we were on the verge of like pulling the plug. on the aid, the assistance we're going to provide to the Ukraine. There's a very real chance that we could pull the plug, take away the help, and Putin and the Russians would just move in and take over. And I didn't feel like a hero with that sort of staring us in the face. When we leave this week and go back to our districts, our states, our homes across the country, and reflect back on what we've done, what we've decided, I want to feel like a hero. I want all of us to feel like a hero or a heroine and deserve to be feeling that way. There is I'm a great student of World War II, and some of my colleagues are as well. And remember a time when Churchill was leading the Allied world and rising and standing up and warning against the threat that Germany faced, provided for the rest of us, and urging us to be brave and be strong, be vigilant, come to the aid of Europe. There was another guy named Chamberlain, who was, his name is sort of thought of in terms of appeasement. Churchill, engage, defend, be strong. Chamberlain, appease. We have a chance here to be more like Chamberlain, more like Churchill, more like Churchill, and less like Chamberlain. And I hope and pray when we vote here today, maybe even tomorrow, that's exactly what we'll do. I want us to make not just the folks of Ukraine and Taiwan and other, I don't want them just to be grateful. I want the people that we serve who elect us and send us here, I want them to be proud of what we've done and the work that we've done on their behalf and on behalf of these other countries who need our help. We are the beacon for democracy for the world. We've been, our Constitution is the longest living Constitution in the history of the world. It basically lays out how a democracy should operate, and for all these years we have. We need to hold that to our heart, and we need to do the right thing. The last point I'd say is this, my mom is a deeply religious woman. I've shared this with some of my colleagues before. She would drag my sister and me in West Virginia, coal mining town in West Virginia. She'd drag us to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, and even on Thursday night. And then we'd go home and she'd turn on TV and we'd watch Billy Graham on television. She wanted us to have a deep faith, but she really wanted us to hold dear the golden rule, the idea that we should treat other people the way we want to be treated. How would we want to be treated if we were the Ukrainian people today? How would we want to be treated if we were the Taiwanese people today, facing the kind of threats that they face? We would want the rest of the world, the rest of the free world, to come to their aid. Not just send troops, not just in fighter pilots and all, but give them the tools that they need to take on this fight and to win it. When we do that, if we do that, and I'm encouraged that we will, we'll deserve the word of President Zelenskyy when he said, you are our hero. You are our hero. Let's be that hero. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Senator Carper.
Mr. Chairman, to our ranking member, thanks for pulling us together today. And Mr. Whitty, thank you for taking the time to talk with me earlier this week and for your testimony today. Among the things that I shared with you are some of the principles that guide me in my life in this role and in other roles I've been privileged to serve. But one of my guiding principles is everything I do, I know I can do better. And I think everything I do, I know I can do better. I think that's true for all of us. I'm striving toward perfection. We know we're not going to get there, but at least that's our goal. Another one of my guiding principles is to treat other people the way I want to be treated. Golden rule. And I try to put myself in other people's shoes, whether you happen to be a constituent, whether you happen to be a patient, whether you happen to be a practitioner or a provider, put myself in their shoes and let that help guide me. The other thing I mentioned to you yesterday is this is a shared responsibility, the idea of shared responsibility. It's clearly obligations that you and your colleagues have, but there's a role for government, and there's a role for others to play. But there's a shared responsibility. One of the things I mentioned yesterday, I quoted Abraham Lincoln, the role, he was asked, what is the role of government? And he said the role of government is to do for the people what they cannot do for themselves. And there's state government, county, local government, and we have federal government. So there's probably a role for all of us to play. We're proud in Delaware, we have about 1 million people in Delaware. We're about 100 miles from north to south, 50 miles from east to west. I cover my state like a glove every week, just about every week. And it's something I love to do, and it's easy to do. But we've heard from constituents, families, people that have been not just disadvantaged, but really hurt, really potentially put in harm's way. We heard from practitioners and providers in a real way, in a human way, on the phone and in person. So for us, this is very real. But thinking aloud in terms of the role of government, since we are the government, federal government, role of government here, what might be one or two of the roles that we could play, should play?
Well, Senator Carper, thank you very much for the question and your comments. I think maybe two areas I would suggest. One is helping the healthcare system think through what the minimum standards, what the kind of the right level of system protection and redundancy is to try and guard against the impacts of future attacks. And then the second is to see what further can be done, what more can be done to reduce the attack velocity that is coming at the U.S. healthcare system from cyber criminals and other possible actors. So I would maybe suggest those two areas for a thought.
Good, thanks. This attack was, as I understand it, maybe the worst of its kind against our healthcare system and the people that depend on that system, but the ramifications remain widespread. It's clear that Change Healthcare was not prepared for this attack. I don't know if it's possible to actually be prepared, fully prepared for an attack of this nature. But you shared with me yesterday that the attacks are ongoing and they're becoming more frequent, and more the people that are doing these, launching these attacks aren't stupid, and they're not getting any dumber, unfortunately. But it's clear that Change Healthcare wasn't prepared for this attack. The lack of basic cybersecurity measures left our healthcare providers and their patients vulnerable to disruptions in care and sensitive data and personal information being stolen. And like my colleagues, I've heard from, as I said earlier, providers, we've heard from practitioners, we've heard from families, from individuals throughout our state who were directly impacted from this attack. One individual we talked to was unable to receive her insulin prescription for several days because of the significant pharmacy delays. And that's not acceptable for any of us. But Mr. Whitty, why do you think it took so long for your systems to get back up and running? And why are many pharmacies still offline today?
Senator, again, thank you for the question. And I'm very sorry to hear the situation of the patient who was waiting for their insulin. We have tried to make clear that we would honor any prescriptions which were filled with the pharmacist uncertain of what the reimbursement status was, but perhaps that also emphasizes the challenges of communicating across such a wide group of providers. The speed of recovery of our systems was really determined by the way the attack encrypted large parts of the environment, and to ensure that the system, when it was brought back online, garnered the confidence of all other participants in the environment that it was safe to reconnect to. And remembering that Change Healthcare is a big connecting system, we really built the environment from scratch. So we did not resuscitate large parts of the old environment, which could have brought with it the risks and the suspicion of infection and would have led to, I think, people not being willing to reconnect at all. We spent a lot of time rebuilding from scratch and then having third-party organizations test, scan, penetrate it to make sure it was super robust before it came back. But unfortunately, that took time. And the consequence of the way the attack impacted the first system And then the commitment to bring back a better clean system was the explanation.
The change Americans deserve.
Well, thank you for your time and for your commitment from all of us to all of you. Marshall, I mentioned earlier, Marshall University's in Huntington, West Virginia, as you know. They've had some great football teams, some of the best football teams in the country, actually, over the years. And thinking about how we take the legislation that Senator Capito, Senator Bozeman, and I, and others have crafted and moved through this committee, moved through the Senate, how we get it through the House and onto the President's desk. And we've made great progress. But I use a football analogy. We're inside the red zone, but the ball's not inside the end zone. And so as we leave here today, we've got to figure out how to get this ball into the end zone. I think we can. I think we can. All politics is personal, and as a friend of mine once likes to say, and we got to push every button to get this done. There's so much that's depending on it. So many jobs, so much good for our economy, just good in terms of climate change. It works in so many different ways that we got to get the job done. My first question really to be to the entire panel, and I want to focus on Swiffer grants. And as I think you all have mentioned in your testimony, Swiffer grant, EPA Swiffer grant program has unlocked funding for unique waste management projects across our entire country. States, communities, and non-governmental organizations have also awarded grants on their own for projects that bolster our nation's recycling systems. My question for each of you. And would you each please share with us how these federal investments will protect the environment as well as contribute to the economy and job creation in communities across our nation? And Mr. Marshall, I'm going to ask you to respond first, and we'll go to your right.
Well, absolutely. Thank you. As a granting organization, I can tell you that over the past 10 years of our existence, the money that we've invested in this system has resulted in the capture of more than 1 billion pounds of new recyclables, avoiding 1 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So Swiffer is going to be doing the same things. And the recycling system, if resourced in the appropriate way that we believe needs to be resourced, it can result in a $30 billion positive economic impact through job creation and private sector investment.
Ms. Firefighters, did you agree with anything he's just said?
Do I agree with it? Yeah, I agree with it.
All right, go ahead and proceed, please.
Yeah. So. Yeah, thank you. We're very excited about the possibility of bringing a private company to actually fill a hole in what we determined was the gap in the circular economy for the salvaged lumber in our area. This will displace the need to actually take virgin lumber out of our forests. It will also create carbon sinks. This old lumber is actually old growth forests. You know, when you think about it, anything before 1940 was harvested out of our old growth forests. So these are carbon sinks, and it's so much better. And then from an economic point of view, these are jobs. You have jobs for the people who are deconstructing the houses, and we're actually complementing the funds that we're getting from Swiffer to train more people to do that. There's jobs to transport the lumber. There's jobs to actually denail and process the lumber. There's jobs to market it, and then there's jobs to sell it. So and then there's the jobs for the actual rebuilding of new houses. So these all create opportunities for new jobs in this sector. And then beyond that, the money is being used in other areas, in other arenas. Like in Hawaii, they're going to be using it in the reuse arena, and I can talk about that at a later time.
Okay. Same question, Ms. Secretary Beiser, please.
In addition to we have a local government, Durham County, who received a grant through Swiffer to update and reconstruct their convenience center in a disadvantaged community. So we're seeing some real impacts along those lines. But just to talk about the state data aspect of it for a moment, I mentioned earlier, recycling being an inherently local activity, and it's important that states have the capacity they need to support those programs to help them understand how they can optimize and make sure that they're reaching their residents and providing access. So having the ability to invest in data, which is not something we often have, is going to be really critical, not just for my state, but for other states. Understand what's in the waste stream, understand where material is being generated, where the infrastructure to collect that material is lacking. We have some MRF deserts that we're trying to address, especially in the northeastern part of our state. So the more we can learn about what's being generated there, which residents have access, which don't, we can help support our local governments to make sure that not only can they provide additional resources, but also as we have a limited amount of grant funding as a state that we can give out. We want to make sure we're maximizing our rate of return on that, leveraging any kind of private investment we can, and data is going to enable us to do all of those things.
All right, thank you. Thank you each for your responses. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, the absolutely critical
about that, if you would, go ahead.
Well, I told the administrator I would be a little late and the chairman, but as a proud grandmother of 8, my oldest grandchild had her little 8th grade graduation this morning, and she gave a 2.5-minute tribute to one of the teachers. And you met a future administrator. I saw a future senator today. So thank you for that.
So you certainly picked the right family to be a part of. As a West Virginian native, I know the Capito family has great history. Let me just start off, if I could, with a question, Administrator Bott, regarding the Francis Scott Key Bridge. I want to, it's anticipated that federal funds to rebuild the bridge will come out of the Federal Highway Administration's emergency relief program. It's also anticipated that state insurance proceeds and other potential legal judgments or settlements against the responsible parties will be used to reimburse the federal government for the use of emergency relief funds. Could you just take a minute or two and speak a bit more about the role that insurance proceeds and other claims will play in paying for the bridge replacement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. Yes, we have been working since the early hours of the tragic incident with Maryland DOT, both on the disaster recovery and then turning increasingly to the rebuilding of the bridge. I know this issue has been important for this committee. I spoke about it at another hearing last month. The president is also very engaged, Secretary Buttigieg as well, specifically around the $350 million insurance payment. ER, as it is written, the ER relief program, does require the Federal Highway Administration to make sure that states are making every effort to recover insurance funds and others to reimburse the program. So we are working closely, particularly our lawyers are looking closely at the insurance policy, what is written, just as if you had a home insurance policy, they don't just hand you a check. There are, things that are required in it. So we are grateful that they will make that funding available, but we just want to make sure that we're not skipping any steps as we analyze what's in there.
Thank you. According to the most recent information shared with my office, with our office, Federal Highway Administration's emergency relief backing currently stands at, I think, at about $3.5 billion. My question is, how does the current emergency relief program backlog affect the ability of the program to help states deliver projects that are currently in the pipeline?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question. So I'm going to use round numbers because it's easier for my math, but there's about $4.4 billion in ER requests that are out there now. We have about $850 million in available ER funding. So just for ease, I'm going to say there's about $3.5 billion in unmet needs for the ER program.
$1.5 billion of that is what we have tagged right now for the FSK bridge rebuild. The other $2 billion are from states across the country, from various fires and floods and other events that have impacted states from California to Tennessee.
You may have already answered this question, but if you have, maybe you can expand on it. But do you anticipate that additional funding will be needed to address the backlog for fiscal years 2024 and 2025?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, absolutely. That I think it's about $100 million a year that it comes through the appropriation process to top up the ER funds, and obviously that is not consistent with what the unmet need is now.
Good. There's a front page article yesterday on the New York Times that some of you may have read, reporting that electric vehicles with a range of more than 300 miles are now becoming more affordable for American consumers. And that's, I think, welcome news that we should all be excited about. However, I remain concerned about the pace by which EV charging infrastructure is being installed across America. As the market for affordable EVs grow, it's critical that drivers have convenient and accessible places to charge them. Some states are doing a good job of using the federal monies and getting this work underway. Some are not. And I'm going to explore with Senator Capito later, maybe later this week, the idea of having a hearing and inviting folks from states that are doing a good job of leveraging the funds that we provided through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and maybe some states that could do a lot better, see what they can learn. But here's my question. I want to be interested in hearing more about what the Federal Highway Administration is doing to work with states to accelerate the installation of EV charging infrastructure. What are the current challenges and what more could be done to move more quickly? Bless you. Bless you twice. All right. How often do you hear the chair of a committee bless a member of the committee when they see it's not every day? But in this committee, we're very bipartisan.
Well, thank you.
Go right
Chairman.
ahead.
And when I went to school in Kentucky, people said, "Bless my heart" to me a lot. And so as long as you don't say that to her, then you're in good shape. Yeah, specifically on the EV chargers, I am a project delivery person, and since I became the administrator 18 months ago, I have taken a project delivery approach to this. We work closely with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation that has been set up. We are working with every single state. And so, look, the president's goal is 500,000 charging ports by the end of the decade. We believe we are on track to hit that goal. I would prefer that there were thousands of chargers.
Say that number again. The goal is
500,000 charging ports is the goal that the president has set by the end of the decade. There's about 183,000 out there available now. The vast majority of those are private sector. There's 6 states that have NEVI-funded chargers that are out the door now. And again, people say, well, that's only 6 chargers. It's actually dozens of charging ports. And I would say that we are on track. Every state has submitted their plan. There are several states that already have NEVI funding chargers out there. We're on track for thousands more charging ports to become available this year, and we will hit that target. But just like it's going to take about 4 years to rebuild the bridge, we anticipated the bulk of chargers coming online in 2024, 2025, 2026. And if you look at the delivery schedule that is out there now for virtually every state, we're on target to hit that place. I'm not happy about the fact that we are, about, I would say, months behind where we were, but with the amount of work that was needed to get that program stood up, we want to continue to work with every single state to accelerate their delivery.
Good. All right, thanks very much for your response. Senator Capito, welcome.
The senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
In that case, I ask to be recognized and pleased to be here with you today. I rise today in strong support of critical bipartisan legislation that will come to the Senate floor not later this year or later this week or this month, but later today. It's called the Fire Grants and Safety Act. Importantly, this legislation includes not one, but two critical pieces of bipartisan legislation that I've been working on with Senator Shelley Capito and a bipartisan coalition of our colleagues literally for years. The first part is called the Accelerating Deployment of Versatile Advanced Nuclear for Clean Energy Act. That's a mouthful. but it's also known as the ADVANCE Act, and we couple that with legislation involving support for our firefighters across the United States of America. Last month, the House of Representatives passed these two bills, not as one, but as a package, by an overwhelming bipartisan vote of, get this, 393 to 13. Now, we don't pass a lot of bills by margins like that over in the House or the Senate, but today we have an opportunity in the Senate to do something very much the same. Before this evening's vote, though, I want to take a few minutes to highlight the significance of both the Fire Grants and the Safety Act, as well as the so-called ADVANCE Act. In my role as co-chair of the Congressional Fire Services Caucus, along with Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, I've shared here on the Senate floor many times over the years that every day, our nation's firefighters bravely run toward danger in order to save lives across America. In my home state of Delaware, there are more than 6,000 firefighters, 6,000, and a great majority of them are volunteers. The same is true in many states across America. And yet, despite their extraordinary dedication to protecting our communities, their jobs are not getting any easier. In fact, they are getting harder. And the risks that they continue to face grow each year. Annually, I'm told that there are over 36 million emergency calls that fire services respond to. 36 million. That's a 20% increase in the last 12 years. This is in no small part due to climate change and the resulting increases in extreme weather events across our country, which are translating directly into hotter, bigger, and more dangerous fires. Just this week, our country is experiencing record-breaking temperatures from New England to California, where heat risks have been categorized by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration as extreme. It's clear that the kinds of emergencies that our firefighters must respond to are changing, and the demands on fire departments across this country are changing as well. For example, last year when a devastating tornado touched down in southern Delaware in Sussex County, it was our firefighters who showed up to lead people to safety. We've seen similar acts of service across our nation, especially on the West Coast, where firefighters have long helped families escape the hazards of wildfires. I believe we have a moral obligation, which I believe is shared responsibility, to provide the resources that firefighters need to continue to protect the rest of us, our families, and our businesses. And today we have an opportunity to do just that. The Fire Grants and Safety Act reauthorizes not one but two critical grant programs that fire departments across our nation rely on to safeguard our communities. The first is called Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant Program, and it provides funding to local fire departments to hire much-needed personnel to respond round the clock to emergency situations. The second is the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program, which helps provide fire departments and emergency medical service organizations with the vital training and equipment, like fire trucks and protective gear, that they need. Fire departments across Delaware have contacted my office to share how these grant programs are a lifeline for their work that they do every day. And I'm sure our colleagues have heard similar stories of the essential roles that these programs play in fire departments across America. For example, fire departments in Colorado have reported a lack of critical funding and supply, which could be aided by the Assistance for Firefighters Grant Program. And firefighters in Vermont, where presiding officers from, firefighters from West Virginia that co-sponsor this legislation, where I was born, have reported being overwhelmed and understaffed in light of recent emergencies in their communities. It is clear as day that reauthorizing these grant programs is imperative. The Fire Grants and Safety Act will also enable the United States Fire Administration to continue to provide leadership, coordination, and training for first responders and emergency medical personnel. As the lead federal agency for fire data collection, public fire education, fire research, and fire service training, the United States Fire Administration ensures that the fire service is prepared to respond to any and all hazards. Firefighters put their lives on the line for us every single day. I'm proud to work with Senator Gary Peters as well as with my Congressional Fire Service co-chairs, Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski, on this legislation to equip our firefighters with the tools and training they need to do their jobs and do them safely. There is an African proverb, but many of my colleagues have heard it because I said it enough, but there's an African proverb goes something like this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think that's true. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Today, on the Senate floor with this legislation, we are going far, and as it turns out, we are going together. Both Democrats and Republicans from all across the country, and in concert with the administration, with the president who supports this legislation. And we're doing it by considering not one, but two bipartisan priorities at the same time. That second priority before us today is legislation known as the Advance Act. This is legislation that Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, my native state, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and I have worked on tirelessly for years in both a bipartisan and a bicameral manner. The Advance Act accelerates the deployment of our nation's largest source of clean power, and that is nuclear energy. Nuclear energy powers millions of homes and businesses across this country every day with zero emissions. It is an indispensable tool in our ongoing efforts to address the climate crisis and strengthen our nation's energy security. My own personal interest in the potential for nuclear energy goes all the way back to my days as a Navy ROTC midshipman, and later as a naval flight officer tracking nuclear submarines throughout the oceans of the world. I witnessed how initially our submarines and later our aircraft carriers could travel millions of miles safely on nuclear power, largely because of the success of the Navy nuclear propulsion program. The United States had the technology and the workforce at the ready to build a commercial nuclear energy industry that could provide safe, reliable, and clean energy to American homes and businesses. Today, nuclear energy provides about 20% of America's electricity, 20%, but nearly half of America's clean energy. Let me repeat that. Nuclear energy provides about 20% of America's electricity, but nearly half of America's clean energy. There's no question that this carbon-free source of energy can and will help us meet, it is helping us meet our climate goals. That's why I have long believed that nuclear energy needs to be part of our work to address climate change while also creating thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs, in fact, across this nation of ours. The Advance Act empowers the Nuclear Regulatory Commission with the tools and with the workforce that it needs to keep our current reactors safe and to review new nuclear technologies efficiently. These resources will enable the Commission to provide the certainty needed to deploy more clean energy and to make sure that our commitment to safety remains paramount at this crucial moment in the history of our planet. The Advance Act also directs the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to support 21st century applications of nuclear energy. For example, the Advance Act requires the Commission to explore how to repurpose retired fossil fuel-fired power plants, as well as existing infrastructure to support new, clean nuclear energy production. Additionally, this legislation fundamentally, and I think firmly, maintains the core of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's mission, and that is to ensure the safety of America's nuclear power. Unless the Nuclear Regulatory Commission diligently ensures the safety of our nuclear fleet of reactors every day, as well as new nuclear technologies, the U.S. will not be able to realize the potential of this carbon-free energy source. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission must maintain this commitment to safety while considering all shareholders, all stakeholder views and concerns equally in order to maintain the public trust and confidence. Ultimately, this bill addresses the most pressing needs of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and will lay the foundation for the safe and successful deployment of the next generation of advanced reactors. As a result, we'll strengthen Americans' leadership on nuclear energy and provide climate leadership on the world stage. Let me be clear. The Advance Act will strengthen our energy and our national security and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as creating thousands of new jobs while growing our economy. I'm not sure what our colleagues would call that in their states, but in Delaware, something like that, we call that a win-win-win situation. We need more of those. In closing, the legislation we vote on today will provide fundamental support for our nation's firefighters while bringing our nation one step closer to a clean energy future. Once again, I want to share my heartfelt gratitude to our colleagues and our staff members who have worked with us, Democrat and Republican, House and Senate, in some cases not just for days or weeks or months, but literally for years, in order to bring these provisions across the finish line. So many of our colleagues have had a hand in this effort, but in particular, I want to thank Senator Barry Peters, who chairs the Committee on Homeland Security, with Senator Susan Collins, Senator Lisa Murkowski, who've been great leaders in fire services caucus over the years, Senator Shelley Moore Capito, who literally is the lead author on the Advance Act, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who's very much involved in crafting that legislation as well. We could not have done this and be where we are today without each of you. Before I close, let me also mention, this is not something that I get to do every day, but I want to also thank the Speaker of the House, Congressman Johnson, for ensuring this bill's passage through his chamber with resounding bipartisan support. I think it was about 390 to 13. That's an amazing, amazing outcome in legislation of this magnitude. But, and I want to thank our own Majority Leader here, Senator Schumer, for working with us and his staff to bring this legislation up for a vote today. Some people might be watching this across the country and think, what is this all about? And why would we take legislation dealing with firefighters and the tools, the resources that firefighters need? Why would we couple that with legislation involving nuclear energy? What's the connection? And the connection is this. Last year was the hottest year on record on this planet, as far as the hottest year ever. This week is maybe the hottest week we will have had in this country and maybe on this planet, the hottest week. And what's causing that? Well, we know what it's causing. It's too much carbon dioxide in the air, and we need to reduce it. And one of the great sources of carbon dioxide in the air is the cars, trucks, and vans that we drive. That's probably about 35% of the carbon emissions come from our mobile sources. Maybe another 30% come from our power plants that provide electricity for us. Maybe another 25% come from our manufacturing plants. That's where it's coming from. And we're doing a whole lot of things. House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans working together in many cases, working with the current president, current administration, in order to try to turn around the fact that our planet is on fire and getting hotter. We have passed all kinds of legislation. It's being enacted now, a methane emission reduction program, legislation involving the release of hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, legislation as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, including literally across the country, the places people can charge and recharge their batteries, corridors across the country to recharge electric vehicles. That's part of what we're doing. Clean hydrogen which can be used to provide, literally to fly airplanes and to move cars, trucks, and vans, and to provide us the electricity that we need. We're doing a lot on windmills, especially windmills, not just on land, but windmills on either side of our country. And a lot is going on with respect to solar, and we can be proud of all that. Having said that, I'm probably mixing metaphors here, but we're paddling against the tide. This is a tough battle. And while we've launched a lot of smart programs and smart initiatives and doing it in a bipartisan way, and we've done it with, in many cases, not just environmental groups, but business groups as well. But we still have a big fight ahead of us. And we need to implement fully the Methane Emission Reduction Pact, the Kigali Treaty, bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, clean hydrogen hubs, all the stuff that people hear about we need to not just talk about it, we need to implement it. that's what I'm going to be spending the next 6 months that I serve here, or privileged to serve here in the United States Senate to do, to make sure that the promise of all the legislation, all the groundwork that we've laid will actually bear fruit. And these young pages that are sitting here up at the along with the presiding officer who come here from all over the country, they're 16, 17, 18 years old, to make sure that they're going to have a planet to grow up on. We want to make sure they have a planet to grow old on. And it's up to us to make sure that that happens. It's a shared responsibility like most things. It's not just a Democratic responsibility. It's not just a Republican responsibility. It's not just on the president or the legislative branch. It's not just businesses and all. It's really all of us. We all have a dog in this fight. A lot of us have children and grandchildren, and hopefully they will benefit throughout their lives from the work that we're doing here, including the work that we're doing here today. I'm very proud of my colleagues for getting us to this point in time, and I'm especially anxious to have this vote later today. And I hope the kind of margin that they were able to stand up in the House, I think it was 390 to 13. I hope we can do at least as well, and maybe even a little bit better. And I'm grateful to the President for his strong support of what we're bringing up today. And he's already telegraphed that he's prepared, when he receives this legislation, to sign it into law. Joe Biden used to say it's when he was a mere mortal, when he was a senator from Delaware, we used to talk about volunteer fire companies. We got a bunch of them. And most of the firefighters in Delaware are members of volunteer fire companies. And I think that's probably true across the country. But then Senator Joe Biden used to say that volunteer fire community in Delaware was really sort of like, they're so potent, they're kind of like a third party, sort of like a third party. And they punch above their weight in many ways. And they punch above their weight in many ways to make our state safer. I think that's the case across America. We want to make sure that they have the tools, the resources that they do to do their jobs even better, and to make sure they're able to do it safely at the end of the day, so they can go home to their families, have a full and a long life. With that, Mr. President, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. And I want to thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer, as somebody who's been very supportive of this initiative. And we look forward to, under your leadership today, to get a strong vote. And I'll look forward to coming back in an hour or so and being part of that vote. With that, I yield the floor. And I note the absence of a quorum. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to speak for up to 15 minutes, and that Senator Young be recognized to speak after that for up to 5 minutes prior to the scheduled vote.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, that the privileges of the floor be granted to a following guest member of our staff, my staff, Kelly Powers, during the pendency of today, July 25th, 2024, and signed Thomas R. Carper. That would be me, and I would like to send this up to you, Mr. President.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, good morning. Last month, as some of us will require, marked the 80th year since President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known as the GI Bill, into law. 80 years. In the 8 decades since the GI Bill was enacted, it has helped millions of veterans, including myself, to pursue an education, to become homeowners, and to live the full American dream. The GI Bill truly transformed not only our economy, but a lot more than that. I was glad to recently lead a bipartisan resolution recognizing the importance of this legislation with Senators Jerry Moran, Senator John Tester, and Senator John Bozeman. As I've shared here many times before, the GI Bill is often called the greatest legislation ever enacted in the history of the United States, including here in this chamber. First, the GI Bill successfully enabled millions of service members, including myself, to transition back to civilian life after serving our country at home and, in many cases, abroad. Second, it uplifted millions of American families, and it reinvigorated our economy. Third, it allowed for benefit awards to our veterans to be passed on to their family members. And fourth, it has paved the way for subsequent critical legislation that serves those who served our country in times of war and times of peace. The effects of all four of these achievements are felt to this day. And I'd like to take a few minutes, if I may, at this time to elaborate on the impact of each of those four. First and foremost, the GI Bill helped my parents' generation return to civilian life following World War II. This generation was well acquainted with hard times. Many of these folks had been raised during the previous World War and were just starting to rebuild their lives when the Great Depression ravaged the American economy, leaving 1 of every 4 Americans jobless. But despite hardship at home, these brave Americans answered the call to serve our nation in World War II. And one of those brave Americans was my father. My father had been a chief petty officer in the Navy, high school graduate, West Virginia coal mining town. And he and his brother and his brothers-in-law all served in World War II. Several of them as chief petty officers in the Navy, others as sergeants in the Army or Marine Corps. But when the war was over, my dad came back to West Virginia and used the GI Bill to learn how to fix wrecked cars. Most people don't think of the GI Bill as something used to fix wrecked cars, but he did. And that turned into a job for him at a place in Beckley, West Virginia, coal mining town, where he fixed wrecked cars at Burleson Oldsmobile. And one day he was working in Burleson Oldsmobile, having learned how to fix wrecked cars and do body work through the GI Bill. He was visited by a claims adjuster from Nationwide Insurance. And the Nationwide, it turned out, had insured the car, that wrecked car that my dad was working on that day at Burleson Oldsmobile. And the fellow from Burleson Oldsmobile, rather the fellow from Nationwide Insurance, engaged my father in a conversation about how was the progress coming along in terms of repairing the wrecked car. And they talked for a bit. And at the end of the conversation, the fellow from Nationwide said to my dad, he said, you know, you seem to have a lot on the ball for guys fixing wrecked cars here at Burleson Oldsmobile. And my dad went on to explain how he'd been a chief petty officer in the Navy. For those of you who know the military, the top non-commissioned officer in the Navy is the chief petty officer. That's what my dad was, and several of my uncles as well. That conversation with the claims adjuster for Nationwide Insurance that day actually led to a job where my dad became a claims adjuster for Nationwide Insurance. And years later, my dad helped to run the national training program for claims adjusters for Nationwide Insurance. A guy with a high school degree who had a chance to serve in World War II and to benefit from the GI Bill, to have a great career and to be able to provide for his family, along with literally hundreds of thousands of other veterans. But my dad is just one example of millions of Americans that this legislation helped to set on a path to success. But my dad also illustrates the second reason why the GI Bill is among the greatest pieces of legislation ever passed, and that is it lifted up millions of hard-working Americans and helped build the middle class as we know it in this country today. With a stroke of a pen, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed into law one of America's most ambitious investments in our workforce and our nation's history, and it paid dividends. It has paid dividends for decades to come, generations past and future. Among other things, the original GI Bill provided a college education to add, listen to this, 450,000 engineers, 240,000 accountants, 238,000 teachers, 122,000 dentists, 91,000 scientists, 67,000 doctors, and one or two folks who could fix wrecked cars at places like Burleson Oldsmobile in Beckley, West Virginia. Just like my dad, countless others used their GI Bill benefits to learn a trade or to learn a skill, enable them to lift themselves and their families up firmly into the middle class. It was clear then, as it is now, that the GI Bill is perhaps one of the most worthwhile economic investments in our nation's history. According to a 1988 report from the Joint Economic Committee, it was estimated that for every dollar that the United States has invested in our veterans through the GI Bill over the years, roughly $7 has been returned in economic growth for our nation. Almost never do we see legislation have the power to single-handedly transform our economy and continue to do so, not just for a couple of years, but for decades. The GI Bill exceeded and continues to exceed all expectations. As many of my colleagues know, I've personally benefited from the opportunities provided by the GI Bill. I would not be standing here today in this place, speaking on this floor, without the benefits provided me as a Vietnam veteran coming back from my third tour in Southeast Asia, eventually moving to Delaware and enrolling in business school at the University of Delaware. And that education, along with my time as a Navy ROTC midshipman at Ohio State earlier in time, has enabled me to serve Delaware as their treasurer, as their congressman, at-large congressman, as their governor, and now for the last 23 years as their United States senator. Third reason why the GI Bill is truly extraordinary is that this legislation and subsequent legislation like the current post-9/11 GI Bill allows for benefits to be passed on to family members of veterans who do not use or need the benefit themselves. My generation, when we came back from Southeast Asia and the Vietnam War, if we took advantage of the GI Bill, that was fine, I did. But if we had a spouse, our spouse could not take advantage. If we had children, dependent children, they could not take advantage of the GI Bill. That's all changed. And for a GI who doesn't use the GI Bill benefit today, if they have a spouse, their spouse can use it. If the spouse doesn't use it, they have children, their children can use the GI Bill. What a benefit for not just the GI, but also for the spouse and the family members. Today's GI Bill allows countless veterans across our country to take advantage of these generous educational benefits or pass them down to their families. Moreover, the post-9/11 GI Bill includes a program called the FRY Scholarship, FRY spelled F-R-Y, scholarship that ensures surviving spouses and children of fallen service members have access to hard-earned benefits of their family member who served and made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. We've seen the impact of this legislation firsthand in my home state of Delaware with families like those of the late Staff Sergeant Christopher Slutman, Marine veteran. A native Delawarean, Staff Sergeant Slutman bravely served as a New York firefighter and as a U.S. Marine in Afghanistan. However, 5 years ago, he was tragically killed in combat, leaving behind his wife and their 3 daughters, McKenna, Kenley, and Wesley. And thanks to the post-9/11 GI Bill, which extended the benefits of the GI Bill to veterans who served after September 11, 2001, Staff Sergeant Slutman was entitled to a wide range of educational benefits. And after his tragic passing, Staff Sergeant Slutman's GI Bill benefits were ultimately allowed to be passed down to his 3 daughters, thanks to the FRY Scholarship, which was one of the provisions I was proud to support in the post-9/11 GI Bill. Last but certainly not least, the GI Bill is among the greatest legislation ever enacted because it has served as an excellent model for how we can continue to provide resources for our nation's veterans. Throughout my years in the Senate, and there's been quite a few years, almost 24, I've worked to advance critical legislation that delivers on the promise to serve those who have served our nation. In addition to the post-9/11 GI Bill and the forever GI Bill, I was proud to lead passage of a bipartisan amendment that finally closed something called the 90-10 loophole. For those who may not know, this loophole allowed bad actors in the for-profit college sector to take advantage of our veterans' hard-earned GI benefits. One veteran misled or mistreated is one too many, and I was proud that my Senate colleagues and I came together unanimously to pass the amendment that Senator Moran and I authored to close this loophole, and we did. We must also be on guard to root out the bad actors who try to take advantage of our veterans. That's why just this week I co-hosted our annual Veteran Summit in Delaware with Senator Chris Coons, Representative Blunt Rochester, joined by our Secretary of the VA, Dennis McDonough, to raise awareness of the deceptive marketing tactic deployed by those we know as claims sharks. Claim sharks are unaccredited lawyers and consultants who try to take advantage of vulnerable veterans by offering to help them file claims with the Veterans Benefit Administration, and then go on to take a significant percentage of the benefit that the veteran should have received. At our summit a week ago, we spoke with dozens of veterans about the free resources provided them, available to them through the VA to help them avoid falling for scams and ensure that they know about the full range of benefits they are entitled to. And more recently, I co-sponsored bipartisan legislation to impose penalties on these sharks so that we can further protect our veterans. After all, our commitment to care for our veterans, including safeguarding their hard-earned benefits, is a sacred obligation and one that I worked hard with many of our colleagues, Democrat and Republican, to fulfill. In closing, it's clear that without the foundation of the original GI Bill, our ambition to craft and pass generations of subsequent legislation to help our veterans might not have been possible. For all these reasons, the lasting legacy of the GI Bill leaves no doubt that it's truly the greatest legislation ever passed in this chamber and in this Congress in the history of our nation. For my family and me, to the veterans of today in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and all of our branches, I'm honored to lead this celebration of the 80th anniversary of the original GI Bill. Here's to another 80 years and hopefully many beyond that. I'll close with one thing. There's I used to think it was in the Bible, Mr. President, that if you give a person a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a person to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. As it turns out, that's not in the Bible. It's not in the scripture. For years I said it was. And finally, you used that line in a speech back in Delaware. I said at the end of my speech that talking about how our obligation is trying to make sure that people have the ability to feed themselves and their families. And as it turned out, there's a preacher in the audience when I said those words. He spoke to me after my speech and after the program was over. And he said, those words are not in the scripture. Those words are not in the scripture. The idea that we have an obligation to help teach a person to fish and so they can feed themselves and their families and all. He said, that's really not in the Bible. And I said, well, it ought to be. It ought to be. We do have we have an obligation to help people, not just to give people something, but if they're hungry, they need help, we have an obligation to help them. But the real obligation we have is to make sure that ultimately they can help themselves, that we can help themselves. And one of the great things about the GI Bill is it enables our service men and women to help themselves as they go forward in the future with their lives and to help their families. It's a great piece of legislation, and we celebrate it here today for the 80th year since its original enactment in this chamber. And with that, Mr. President, I'm going to yield the floor. Thanks so much.
For those questions. Administrator Bott, General Spellman, as we discussed earlier, the Key Bridge is only one of many bridges in the United States that lack functional pier protection. That list also includes bridges near major ports like New York, like Philadelphia, like New Orleans. Administrator Bott, what is the Federal Highway Administration doing to better protect the bridges across our country that still lack adequate pier protection? I have a follow-on to that, but just start with that. What is the Federal Highway Administration doing now to better protect bridges across our country that still lack adequate pier protection?
Thank you, Chairman Carper. Obviously, it's an incredibly important question. We have been in close contact with AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, just to get a better understanding of how many bridges are have exposure to vessels of this size. We are making them aware of all of the funding opportunities, both in the formula and discretionary grant programs. I will say the Bridge Large program, or the Bridge program, the Bridge Improvement Program, is obviously oversubscribed. We do have a funding shortfall, so it's both identifying the needs that are out there and then finding funding priority to address those needs. And we're going to continue to work closely with the NTSB as they provide their recommendations as to what the appropriate level of protection. As we know, there were dolphins on this bridge, but we're not successful in protecting the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
Thank you. General Spellman, looking back on the disaster, what are some of the major safety measures that the Corps would recommend taking while the Federal Highway Administration and Congress work together on addressing this safety concern?
Yes, sir. And I think we will take the lead of the National Transportation Safety Board. As I mentioned, their report that they released in mid-May, the bulk of that report talked about the vessel and the electronics, but there is a section in the back on bridge safety and resilience against collisions that we had here. Everything from fendering and larger and more dolphins. Those are the large concrete cylinders that you saw during your visit that we anchor into the bottom of the river to protect those important piers. I think as we do what we call our Section 408 reviews for new bridges and navigation channels, that we in the Corps have to take a harder look at those safety measures and work with our state and federal partners to make sure that they are in fact implemented.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Wedefield, a question I could on air quality impacts. And the question is, last month when we met with Governor Moore, who I must say is a very impressive leader, and I have several opportunities to meet with him, and very impressed. But when we met with the governor with the lieutenant governor at the site of the bridge collapse, during that meeting, we discussed, as you may recall, some of the impacts that the bridge collapse may be having on people who live in the surrounding communities, impacts including trucks, a lot of other vehicles that have been rerouted through people's neighborhoods. We talked about the effect that can have on congestion, the effect that it can have on safety. I'd add probably the effect it could have on air quality. We also discussed the potential for increased air pollution from the trucks that serve the port. My question is, what is the state of Maryland doing to monitor and if necessary, mitigate the effects of increased truck traffic through the neighborhoods close to the port?
Yes, thank you, Senator. We're working directly with the local governments, meaning Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Anne Arundel County, which you get the immediate community impacts, to make sure we're monitoring any truck traffic, policing it where they should be and where they shouldn't be, and then working with the community to deal with their basic transportation needs, because the inability just to get across to another part of the city and the county without the short path of the bridge. So we're working with that. We're working with our transit administration to look at opportunities there as well as travel demand management. We're also working with the Metropolitan Planning Organization to monitor the air quality, and with our Maryland Department of Environment to monitor that. Obviously, that goes eventually into the state implementation plan on the air quality side. But if there's any immediate hot spots in effect, so that we can address those, we've been very successful with the trucking community, obviously, to make sure they understand the implications of that and to work with us. And so that has been working very well, and we'll continue those efforts.
Very good. Just a follow-up question, if I could, is there any assistance that you and your colleagues need from the federal government to address air quality impacts resulting from the traffic effects of
Not
the
at this
bridge's collapse?
time. Again, I think the open communication that we're having with the community, meaning both the people that live in the area, the businesses that are dependent upon the highway system in that area, the trucking, the port, as long as we keep those lines of communications open, I think we can keep tackling these issues head on.
All right, thanks. Senator Capito, would you like to go next or yield to Senator?
Yeah, I'll yield to Senator Ricketts.
All right, thanks. Senator
Great.
Ricketts.
Thank you very much, Senator Capito.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your questions.
Thanks so much. Mr. Badel, I understand we've discussed how your name is pronounced, and it's Bagel with I guess a D, is that right?
It's Badel.
With a B.
Badel, yes.
Badel, okay. We welcome you. I understand your wife Hillary is with you. Would you raise your hand, ma'am? All right. I understand you got some children here. A daughter, Ainsley, is that you? Ainsley? Raise your hand, Ainsley. Go ahead. All right. And Ainsley, do you have a brother? What's his name? All right. Max, to the max. And Ainsley, do you have any grandparents here? No. Are these your parents? That's a question. Are these your parents? All right, good. All right. Well, we thank you all for coming on. My first question is, and I ask variations of this question, but if you try to get people to explain complex concepts, I say, how would you explain this to your grandparents? I say, how would you explain this or that to your grandparents? I'm going to say, how would you explain what you do to your in-laws?
The simplest way to explain what we do is that we are we're an agency that provides coordination among the various federal agencies that are responsible for permitting big infrastructure projects. And what we do is provide transparency and predictability and accountability to the permitting process. Many times people don't understand the various steps that go into permitting a big infrastructure project. And what we do is break it down into the individual steps and the milestones to achieve those permits and provide a timeline for the accomplishment of that task. And so people can look at it and understand if it starts on day 1, we have until day 365 to achieve this outcome.
Good. I mean, I'm looking at your in-laws and thumbs up, thumbs down, what are you thinking? All right. They're rolling their eyes.
I get that a lot, Senator.
Not really. I see you're drawing over your left shoulders. I just come from the Environment and Public Works Committee, which is having a hearing on the Key Bridge, the bridge in Baltimore that was badly damaged. And I'm going to slip back over there as soon as I get to ask some more questions of you. But I see Rebecca Higgins, who's a longtime member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, helped us write big parts of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was hugely helpful during my tenure in the committee. So, Rebecca, it's nice to see you. My question, last year, the Environment and Public Works Committee held, I think not one, but a couple of hearings on permitting. Common theme at our hearings was the importance of public engagement, as you may know. We learned that when project sponsors understand community concerns early in the process, sponsors can often include solutions in the project's design. Public engagement can build trust. It can increase public buy-in, can help resolve issues, it can help prevent litigation, and ultimately it can save time and money. My question, based on your experience, how does community engagement facilitate timely completion of reviews and improve permitting outcomes?
Well, I appreciate that question, Senator. The early and meaningful engagement is a kind of foundational piece of effective environmental review. The bipartisan permitting reform implementation rule, the NEPA Phase 2 rule, emphasizes early public engagement as part of the NEPA process. What we do at the Permitting Council for our Fast 41 covered projects is ensure that we are providing transparent information to the public about the project and its status in the permitting process. Ultimately, the earlier you engage with affected stakeholders and have meaningful conversations with them to identify their concerns and also potential issues on a project, the better you are able to incorporate those concerns into project design, into the analysis to ensure that you are identifying alternatives that will not result in avoidable impacts that would then trigger further complications down the road. The earlier you engage, the sooner you identify the issues, the earlier you can resolve them. What often happens without early engagement and meaningful public involvement is that issues will emerge later in the process that you could have identified sooner that will have a much more material effect on the permitting timeline. If you can identify early and resolve them early, you can have much more predictability. And at the end of the day, project sponsors are willing to account for a slightly longer timeline if they know that it's going to be longer. The unpredictability of unexpected delays is what can really cause problems.
I'm reminded of a hearing that we held before the Environment and Public Works Committee. I think it was late last year, maybe late last year. And the issue of what can we do to ensure better outcomes in projects. And we had a wide range of witnesses. There's different views. You wouldn't expect them to agree on something like this. And they all came back in their testimony and said, we're better off when we hear community concerns at the beginning of the process rather than at the end. Let me ask a second question. With respect to the Inflation Reduction Act funds, as you mentioned in your testimony, the Inflation Reduction Act included some $350 million, with an M, million, dollars to the Environmental Review Improvement Fund, which we created, as you'll recall, in the FAST 41 Act. Oftentimes, when federal agencies have adequate resources, permitting is more efficient. And my question is now, how has the $350 million from the Inflation Reduction Act for the Environmental Review Improvement Fund, how has that helped the Permitting Council support other federal agencies, states, and tribes in improving permitting reviews? And if you could, give us a couple of examples, please.
Absolutely. So we have provided $165 million to federal agencies to increase capacity at those agencies, whether that be hiring FTEs at the agency, contract support, or other tools, templates that they can develop to improve the efficiency and timeliness of the environmental review permitting process. We've also invested $30 million in IT solutions at the agencies to help them modernize, I should say, their IT infrastructure to bring it into the 21st century in many cases. There is, an example that I like to cite is that the Coast Guard used to use a Microsoft Word document for their bridge permit application. And with the investments that we've made at the Coast Guard, they're actually making an online portal for the bridge application, which will make it much more efficient for review and intake of those permitting actions. We've also provided funds to tribes who are engaged in the environmental review and permitting for FAST 41 covered projects through our Tribal Assistance Program.
All right. And Mr. Chairman, if I can I do a follow-up question?
Please.
How is the Permitting Council using the environmental review improvement funds to promote early and meaningful community engagement?
So our tools that we are investing in at the agencies and the resources that we are investing in will enable the agencies to do more meaningful outreach. It will make the process more transparent for project applicants and the public. We are also obviously using our dashboard to provide vital information to the public on the status of the projects. Also, I mentioned the Tribal Assistance Program. That is all about engagement with tribes who are engaged in the FAST 41 program.
Okay, good, thanks. I have a bunch of other questions I have, and I'll submit those for the record. I need to get back to my other committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for letting me jump in here. I want to say to your children again, I love it when folks, witnesses bring spouses, children, in-laws, and it's a family affair. I just want to say to your kids, how old are your kids?
They're 9 and 11.
9. Who's 9? Daughter?
Max.
Yeah, son 11. Let me talk to the two of you just for a second, okay? We have, as you know, 50 states. 50 states. He's our chairman, he's our leader on this committee. He's from the state of Michigan, I'm from the state of Delaware. Although I'm a huge fan of the Detroit Tigers, as he knows.
And we're happy about that.
Oh, yeah. But we have, just for your kids, we have 50 states. Every state has 2 United States senators. And our job is to help make the rules for the country. That's what we do. We help make the rules for the country. And we don't do this by ourselves. We have a lot of people helping us. They're sitting behind us and in the audience as well. But that's what we do, help make the rules for the country. And we're delighted to have a chance to work with your dad, your husband, your son-in-law in this effort. This is important stuff. This is important stuff for our country today and going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Hopefully they'll both get extra credit for school today. This is a civics lesson that's
Mr. Abate, thank you for joining us today. I have the privilege of representing Delaware, the first state to ratify the Constitution. We did that over 200 years ago, and the Constitution sort of outlines how we elect our leaders. And it changes with respect to technology over the years. But there's, for as long as we've been a country, threats to our leaders when they pursue elective office. We're going to be gathering, some of us will be gathering in Chicago in just a few weeks. Others will be gathering in other parts of the country to help make sure that what was adopted in that original Constitution is actually carried out faithfully. And it's just incredibly important that those who aspire to elective office and those who take on those challenges are protected, and their families are protected, as well as those who surround them. I share with my colleagues My prayers for those who have been killed or injured on July 13th. We're grateful that one of our presidential candidates is okay. But I have a question about what I can't get over how a 20-year-old loner could somehow outsmart two of the smartest federal agencies and state agencies and law enforcement with an odds of like 1,000 to 1 and be able to almost pull this off. It just blows my mind. Hopefully we'll get to the truth in all of that. I'm a Navy guy. I spent many years of my life in the Navy. I learned as a midshipman that when the ship runs aground at sea, the commanding officer is held responsible. Whether the commanding officer is awake or asleep at the helm, but the commanding officer is held responsible. And I think we have to make, at the end of the day, I'm not interested in a blame game, but I'm sure interested in finding out who was responsible and making sure that they account for their responsibility. My question is, what policies are currently in place to facilitate real-time information sharing between the Secret Service and local law enforcement during an event? And what changes to information sharing practices will the Secret Service make in light of the apparent breakdown in communications on July 13th?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So we're looking at our procedures. We rely on a counterpart system, and the radio interoperability it's a complex challenge. It's not just about being able to find whatever frequency our local counterparts are on and then just piping it in. There's some technical challenges that have to be there. So to alleviate that, we've always relied on a security room where we have representatives from the local agencies. Those individuals are there to, one, bring their own radio and then relay relevant information that would impact our security plan. I think what I'm looking at, and again, what I'm in looking at this situation is there was a unified command post, and we had our security room, and we had communications that day at the Butler Farm site were challenging. Not just challenging for the Secret Service, but for challenging for locals. There were some cellular issues. There were radio issues. And you saw that with the testimony from the colonel from Pennsylvania State Police last week in the House. So I think as I'm thinking about this, I think we need to consider what is our model moving forward. And I think we need to be where the greatest amount of partners are when that information is being discussed. The other thing that I'm looking at is we need to also make sure that we have redundancies as far as cellular on the ground or additional repeaters. And so I've directed our Chief Information Officer to do that, and we are rolling assets out now supporting campaign sites.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Bay, quick question. Based on the initial information you've gathered from the investigation, do you believe there were any actions taken by the shooter in the weeks, days, or hours leading up to the shooting that should have caused alarm and grabbed the attention of law enforcement?
He did not have any interactions with law enforcement leading up to this, Senator. We haven't found anything yet that would have alerted law enforcement or FBI or Secret Service to his intention activities in advance of this event. I will note, however, to your prior question, that we do have a very strong relationship, an integrated relationship between FBI and Secret Service and every other federal, state, local agency you can imagine. We have constructs like the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and Violent Crime Task Forces where we're cross-embedded with each other. And when it comes to this event and others like it, we're always talking in advance. In fact, with respect to this event, we did have a meeting between U.S. Secret Service and FBI in the days leading up to the event to determine, assess whether there was any information or intelligence pertaining to a threat against the rally or to former President Trump or anyone else there. There was an absence of that in the lead up specifically, and again, none of us had any information in our holdings with regard to the ultimate shooter.
All right, thank you for that. Thanks very much, both of you.
Next on
The Senate Judiciary Committee is Senator Gray.
Senator Carper, you're recognized for your questions.
Yeah, thanks very, very much. I mentioned I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the U.S. Senate, and kind of relates to my great affection and interest in the postal issues. We used to fly 12-hour missions. We fly them off the coast of Vietnam and Cambodia. And at the end of the missions, we come back, debrief, and my crew, 13-man crew, would oftentimes have dinner together, chow together at an outdoor cafe on the base where we were located. And they had Armed Forces radio piped in on the speakers so we could actually hear music from America. And one of the groups that was pretty big at the time was a British group, I think, called Led Zeppelin. I think they had a very successful album called The Song Remains the Same. I'm channeling that song as I sit here with the Postal Service. The song remains the same. Senator Peters and I have worked for years, along with members of our staff, along with you, to try to make sure that we have a Postal Service that's one that we can be proud of, that provides not just mail services for folks that are deployed around the world in our armed forces, but to meet the services for our constituents and across the country. And one of the things that we do, every one of us in the Senate and the House as well, we all have constituent services operations, as you know, and we take a lot of pride in our constituent services operation. We actually send out a survey at the beginning of every month to constituents who contacted my offices in Delaware and ask them about the quality of the service they're getting from, it could be from the VA, it could be the Department of Transportation, it could be from in the Postal Service. And the Postal Service usually leads the hit parade in unhappiness that we measure from our constituents in terms of folks that are complying, reaching out to us by phone, by mail, by email, to say that the service is not what it should be. And we have worked on legislation to try to help, as you know, to try to stabilize the operation of the Postal Service and their finances. And we're still facing a situation where the quality of the service is evaluated by people who contact my office every month. The quality of service is not getting better, in many cases getting worse. And we find that we're losing money, maybe more than ever. That's not a good combination. And it's not all on the Postal Service. It's not all on the people who work there. It's not all on the Commission. It's not all on us on this committee. But we've got to find a way to a better place for the people we serve, and frankly, for the people who work for the Postal Service. But with that having been said, could both of you, Ms. Fisher, Ms. Pauling, could you share your insights on strategies the Commission could adopt to generally improve the financial stability of the Postal Service? How do you envision pushing for innovation and improvements in efficiency within the current regulatory framework to help the Postal Service better serve its customers? Please, Ms. Fisher, would you go first?
I don't know that we could alone improve the financial viability of the Postal Service. You laid out what is a significant problem. Their volume continues to decline, both in the market-dominant and competitive area. Market-dominant volume has been decreasing steadily for several years, and this past year, 9% decrease. It never rebounded fully from COVID. Competitive had been growing, but this past year it decreased by 2%. Despite the relief of a $57 billion liability that the PSRA accomplished, which many, I think, thought would be a big piece of solving the Postal Service's financial problems, they still have a tremendous amount of unfunded liabilities. A huge loan from the Federal Financing Bank, workers' compensation, and continued CSRS and FERS liabilities. We can assist them to a small degree through rate authority, but much of the rest depends upon the public's desire for their product. And as I just laid out, that's waning. At base, I wonder if it's time to potentially revisit the entire business model of the Postal Service. That's something the Commission made several recommendations to the Congress several years ago. It's a tough nut to crack. You need to try and discern what the public truly wants and needs from their Postal Service. A lot of different countries are looking at this right now. Some are considering days of delivery. Some are considering lowering service standards. I'm not saying that's the answer here. lowered service standards certainly doesn't seem to be what the American public wants, but these are things that it may be time to revisit.
Okay. Thanks very much. And Ms. Poling, I just take about a minute and respond, and then well, I'm going to say one other thing and turn it back over to our chairman. Go ahead. Just 1 minute, please.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Carper.
And I'll ask you to respond in greater length and responses for the record. Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you so much. I'll just quickly say then, I think when it comes, you asked primarily about financial stability of the Postal Service.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the greatest way that the Commission can have an impact on that is probably through our rate-making authority. I mentioned earlier that we have opened our review of the rate-making system 2 years earlier. And I really do think, the goal of the system is really to find ways, right, to find this balance between keeping the Postal Service self-sustaining and also finding incentives to reduce cost. And so I think that's something we'll be able to examine in greater length as we go into this new rate-making review. I also think it's important to say that in our recent rate order that we put out, we actually did, put in there that we do believe the Board of Governors should exercise their discretion when they are raising these rates. And I do believe this system will give us a chance to really look at this in greater detail, but that is something that we have said. And again, I think one thing that is a real benefit of this enacted system from 2021, the one we're currently under, is that we do have the ability to revisit it every 5 years, if not earlier. So I think that's something we're doing right now. And the last thing I'll say is we do have a financial report at the Commission where we're really able to examine the revenue and costs of the Commission on an annual basis. Yeah. And I'll be happy to give you even more in my questions for the record.
Before I turn the gavel back over to our chairman, before he pulls it out of my hand, one of the things we've tried to do for years is find how are other, the Postal Service is the only entity in the country that goes to basically every door, every postal box in the country, at least 5-6 days a week. And how do we take that and make that part of the business model that's actually generates enough revenues to be sustaining? One of the things that we hear from time to time is vote by mail. And some states they have a fair amount of vote by mail, in other cases not so much. I think I felt forever that there's actually revenues opportunities for the Postal Service through vote by mail. And frankly, hopefully at the same time we'll get more people to vote. And that would be a good combination. Vote by mail, increase revenues of the Postal Service, and make sure more people are reading the constitutional responsibilities as citizens. With that, we turn it to the chairman, and thank you so much for letting me sit in your seat for a while.
Well,
thanks.
Thank you, Senator Carper, as always. Senator Butler, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you.